Chapter 258. Guan Feng was from the same generation as Zhenya and Zhen Liao. He was a famous person when he was young, and his fame was on par with Zhen Liao and the other royal descendants. The main reason Guan Feng disliked the Zhen family was because of Zhen Liao. The two of them hated each other since they were young. Guan Feng thought Zhen Liao was a boorish man who wore a noble's hat but acted like a boorish man. Zhen Liao thought Guan Feng was a hypocrite. The two of them would fight each other every 2 or 3 days at the affiliated school. Guan Feng didn't care about Zhen Liao's identity at all. Everyone's identities were much less important in the affiliated school, and strength was the only thing that mattered. Zhen Liao was a lot stronger than Guan Feng in terms of physical fitness, but Guan Feng had become famous since a long time ago. Be it academics or shooting skills, he was the one who proposed the Purgatory Thunder Snake project when a lot of nobles were busy racing their girlfriends. The project was recognized as one of the projects with potential by the RAS, and it caused quite a stir. Both the military and the RAS invited him ahead of time. It could be said that the only person who dared to beat up Guan Feng was the brute, Zhen Liao, and Guan Feng did suffer a lot at Zhen Liao's hands. But after Guan Feng developed the Purgatory Thunder Snake, he turned the tables around. Ever since then, the two of them had been competing against each other and slandering each other. At first, they had Zhenya to mediate between them. After all, Zhenya was a nice guy back in the day. But after Zhenya's accident, their relationship soured even further, and it looked like they would never see each other again. Back then, a lot of nobles and Zhen Liao bullied non-noble people like Guan Feng, but they couldn't stop Guan Feng's monstrous talent. Gradually, some of them gave up. After Guan Feng became a prince's shooting instructor, those who spoke ill of him behind his back shut their mouths. Then, the prince who was taught shooting by Guan Feng took over the throne. Those people buried their resentment towards Guan Feng even deeper. There were a lot of nobles who disliked Guan Feng, and some of them had even been scolded by Guan Feng with a gun to their heads. Otherwise, why would there be so many people fanning the flames every time something happened to Guan Feng, but none of them were able to shake his position and influence in the empire? As a shooting instructor who had taught many princes and a famous academician of the RAS, Zhen Liao was the only one who dared to criticize Guan Feng openly. As a result, the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire learned of the grudge between the two. However, from the looks of it, the relationship between the two of them wasn't as bad as it seemed on the surface. Silan could feel the familiarity in Zhenya's words. Actually, the other reason is because of Guan Feng's face, Zhenya said with a smile. Back in the day, Guan Feng was very popular. Many noble girls fell in love with him at first sight, which is why most of the people who dislike him are males. Also, Guan Feng still looks so young, but we're clearly old. Zhen Xingming was massaging Zhenya's shoulders in a fawning manner while listening to his grandfather's embarrassing past. Zhen Xingming nodded in agreement when he heard Zhenya's words. Guan Feng did have a pretty good face, but the owner of this face was clearly his grandfather's generation, and yet he still looked the same as the younger generations. It would be strange if he didn't attract jealousy. Zhenya sat on a wooden chair next to a tree and smiled benevolently as he recounted the events of the past. These were very precious memories for Zhenya, and he was more than happy to share them with his juniors. The current rocking chair was made by Zhen Liao using 1,000-year-old Fuji wood. In terms of wood quality, it was much better than the wooden rocking chair in the small courtyard on planet Brown Earth. In Zhen Liao's words, it could prolong one's life, and it was very suitable for Zhenya's current physical condition. It was a similar scene, but it was in 2 different places. Zhen Xingming massaged Zhenya's shoulders while Silan massaged his legs. After all, he had been in hibernation for many years, and he was getting on in years, so it would take him a while to return to his normal state. Hui Mao rolled the egg to the wooden rocking chair next to Zhenya's. Then, he lay on the egg and wagged his tail lazily. His ears twitched from time to time as he listened to Zhenya's stories and the movements in the fish pond. Silan stayed in this courtyard for the next few days. Guan Feng stopped by once to meet an old friend he hadn't seen for many years. Then, he left after staying for half a day without telling Silan to return to school. He tossed a couple of reference books and tutorials at Silen and told him to finish reading them. A couple of basic exams would be taking place very soon, and Guan Feng's student couldn't afford to fail any of them. Right now, Guan Feng was busy with the development of Purgatory Thunder Snake S. Unlike other researchers, Guan Feng liked to think alone when he was researching something. Therefore, he didn't have time to worry about Silen until the Purgatory Thunder Snake S was released. Silen had to rely on himself for everything. Don't ask me to plead on behalf of your teacher if you don't do well. I can't bring myself to do that. If you really do fail, you'll have to end your own life. Guan Feng's smile was unusually friendly when he said this. Zhen Xingming hid behind Zhenya's back and was glad that he was from AF3, unlike Silen. No one from the Zhen family who wasn't close to the family had come to visit them for the past few days. At first, a lot of people wanted to curry favor with Zhenya after learning of his existence. After all, Zhenya was able to sway Zhen Liao's decision with a single word, and his influence was undoubtedly much greater than Zhen Xingqian's even though he was still a prince. Who wouldn't want to suck up to such a thick thigh? Although they did want to curry favor with Zhenya, they still had to put on a nice front. For example, they could use filial piety as an excuse. However, Zhen Liao waved his hand and said, "Cut the bullshit." And so, everyone quieted down. The Zhen family's social network had been broken by Zhenya. Many of his old acquaintances were no longer around, and the younger generation had their own interactions. Zhenya didn't want to get involved. Zhenya was currently recuperating, and he preferred peace and quiet. It was best if he didn't meet any random people in front of him. Zhenya didn't want Silen to stay by his side all the time. He was a young man, and a young man should act like a young man. In Zhenya's eyes, Silen was too quiet and rational since he was young. Zhenya hoped that Silen could cause as much trouble as Zhen Xingming did. In the past, Zhenya was alone, and he might not have been able to protect Silen if something happened to him. But now that he was back at home, he had the power to do so. He actually hoped that Silen could cause a little trouble like Zhen Xingming did. One day, Zhen Xingming ran into some kind of trouble and sought refuge at Zhenya's place. It didn't take long for Belle and Uliganuo to find him and discuss leaving the imperial capital to have some fun. After all, the semester exams were over. Although he had passed the passing line by flying at a low altitude, he had still passed the exam. It didn't matter how many points he got. Therefore, the three of them decided to go out and celebrate. Zhen Xingming could also avoid his father's punishment. After all, he couldn't hide in Zhenya's place forever. Even if his father didn't say anything, his grandfather would fly into a rage and punish him even more severely. Zhenya told Silen to tag along when he learned about this. Silen had read most of the tutorials Guan Feng had given him, and it was nothing for someone with a good memory. To show his support, Zhenya gave Silen a huge sum of money and told him to buy whatever Silen thought and play whatever he wanted. There was no need for him to be stingy or afraid of trouble. At the same time, he gave Zhen Xingming some pocket money. Belle and Uliganuo's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Wouldn't they be over the moon if they had a relative like this? Grandpa too, you really are my real grandpa. Zhen Xingming put away the money and smiled so widely that his eyes turned into slits. Zhenya knocked Zhen Xingming's head with a smile. Your grandpa will spank your ass until it bleeds if he finds out. Zhen Xingming winked at him, then don't let him find out. While they were discussing where to go to celebrate, Belle's younger sister, the girl known as King Kong, Kenancy, came over as well. Kenancy behaved quite appropriately and even brought a few small gifts. They were all tonics. Moreover, there were some fish that were specially prepared for Huimao. However, most of them were ornamental fish. After learning that there was a fish pond here, Kenancy spent a lot of effort to get her hands on a few rare species. They looked extremely beautiful, and many high nobles liked to decorate their homes with them. However, in Huimao's opinion, what was the point of having beautiful fish? It was fine as long as they tasted good. Therefore, when Kenancy brought out the fish, Huimao swallowed one and smacked his lips with a look of disdain. Kenancy's eyes twitched uncontrollably at the sight. Kenancy immediately contacted someone and told them a few species of fish for them to be sent over as soon as possible. Kenancy had nothing better to do at school right now, and the lectures of the academicians were like heavenly books to her. When she learned that Belle and Uliganuo had come looking for Jen Xingming, she immediately understood that the three of them were planning to escape again. That was why she rushed over and forcefully joined them. No matter what Belle said, she wouldn't go back to AF3 no matter what. She was bored to death at AF3, and she couldn't go to AF1 to play with King Kong and the others all the time. She might as well go out and relax. If the two up there find out, they're going to scold me again. Belle was very reluctant. His mother always blamed him for Kenancy's crooked appearance. It was such an injustice. No, they won't. I'll report it to them when the time comes, Kenancy said indifferently. Belle curled his lips. What's the point of reporting it? I'll still be the one taking the blame in the end. Ah. Oh right. Kenancy suddenly remembered something and clapped her hands excitedly. Let's go to Naimi's place. I want to order a flying car. I heard that they're developing a new model, so I'm going to get one myself. Did Naimi run away too? Jen Xingming asked. He ran away a long time ago. He ran away right after the semester exams were over and before the results were out. I suspect that he's hiding something from us. Kenancy said. Uliganuo nodded in agreement. Yes, he deserves to be punished. How unkind of him to run away when there's something good to do. Jen Xingming knew that Silan didn't know Naimi, so he gave him a simple introduction. Naimi was a direct descendant of the Sizer family. He was about the same age as Jen Xingming and the others, and he was also studying at AF3. However, just like Jen Xingming and the others, he spent a lot more time skipping classes than attending classes. The Sizer family, huh? Jenya thought for a moment. That family that's famous for making flying cars, isn't it? They're a good family. Ha, Grandpa too, I'll pass on your compliment to them. I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to hear it, Jen Xingming said. Bootlicker. Kenancy muttered. It's better than a useless bootlicker. Jen Xingming was referring to the fish Huimao looked down upon by Kenancy. Jenya waved his hands when he saw that the two were about to start arguing again. Alright, I'll give you two a mission this time. Jenya then turned to Silan and said, go with them to the Sizer family and order a flying car. We'll need it when we bring it back here. The Sizer family's custom-made flying cars are pretty good, and it's only natural for young people to need a flying car. Although it sounded like he was asking Belle, Kenancy, and the others to help Silan look for a custom-made flying car, he was actually asking Belle and the others to hold the fort for Silan. After all, Silan wasn't a noble, and the Sizer family was a pretty influential noble family. Nobles were used to putting on airs and looking down on others in front of non-nobles. Jenya was afraid that Silan would be at a disadvantage if he went to the Sizer family. Although they were good for nobles, they weren't stupid. Naturally, they understood the meaning behind Jenya's words. Don't worry, Grandpa too, Silan is my brother. I'll never forgive anyone who dares to bully my brother. Jen Xingming promised again and again. Yeah, don't worry. No one will dare to bully us while we're here. Uliganuo also said. Belle had an odd look on his face. Actually, you shouldn't underestimate Silan too much. We might even need Silan's face when the time comes. What do you mean? Jenya asked curiously. Belle told him about the incident when he went to the 23rd star region to experience life. Jenya didn't know Fleeka. Fleeka didn't exist at the time of the incident, but after listening to Belle's explanation, he understood that Fleeka was a very important member of the Sizer family's flying car designers. He was also the backbone of the Sizer family and had a lot of say in important decisions. Jenya felt a lot more at ease now that he knew Fleeka. He was also glad that Silan was able to get to know these important people. A person's influence wasn't limited to their personal strength. It was also related to the connections they held. At first, Genya thought that Sillin was a taciturn person who didn't speak much or care much about anything, and that he would suffer a loss when it came to connections. He didn't think that Sillin was far more capable than he thought. Genya was very pleased. He felt like his own child had grown up, and he was very proud of the fact that the little boy who was abandoned in the forest had slowly grown into a person who couldn't be underestimated. Okay. Genya sighed emotionally for a moment before saying, Sillin, the thing on your finger represents me. You don't have to hide it when you need it. As a symbol of the Gen family, the leaf pattern on Sillin's finger was no less important than the one on Gen Xingming's wrist. Therefore, Genya wanted to let Sillin know that he had the Gen family and the Fuji royal family behind him, and that he wasn't inferior to the nobles. After deciding to visit the Sizer family, the group prepared to depart immediately. However, Sillin was a little worried about Hui Mao. The person Kenancy contacted earlier had delivered a batch of fish to them. Unlike the ornamental fish they had received earlier, these fish were strong and practical. Many of these fish had sharp teeth, and some of them were poisonous. However, they tasted delicious if they were properly processed. They were fat, tender, and tasty. Hui Mao's eyes widened and his drool dripped as he stared at the fish jumping happily in the pond. This is what it means to store food. This is what it means to live. Hui Mao wanted nothing more than to jump into the pond and have intimate contact with these fish, but Sillin twisted the back of his neck to talk to him. At first, Hui Mao was planning to go for a stroll with Sillin, but Hui Mao changed his mind after seeing these fish. He decided to guard this fish pond and let Genya continue to fill it up. Then, he would invite some of his friends from AF1 over for a gathering. Sillin was a little worried about Hui Mao's change of mind. The frequency at which Hui Mao's tail was wagging was enough to tell that he was up to something again. That's enough, Sillin. Let we stay here and keep this old man company, Genya said. Sillin no longer objected since Genya had spoken. However, he still twisted Hui Mao's ear and gave him a bunch of instructions. Sillin knew Hui Mao's capabilities all too well. He wouldn't lose to Gen Xingming and the others in a fight. I know. Do you think I'm that kind of stupid cat? Hui Mao promised. You're that kind of stupid cat. However, Sillin didn't say this out loud. He only replied in his mind. After everything was settled, Sillin, Gen Xingming, and the others left the Imperial Star region for the Sizer family's headquarters. Inside Genya's courtyard, Hui Mao walked around the fish pond. After thinking for a while, he finally ran up to Genya who was resting on a rocking chair with his eyes closed. He jumped onto Genya's lap, found a comfortable position and squatted down. Then, he called out sweetly, Master Grandpa too, if Sillin was here, he would definitely have goosebumps all over his body. Genya opened his eyes and looked at Hui Mao who was looking at him expectantly. He smiled and scratched Hui Mao's chin. What is it? Master Grandpa too, let's eat fish every day. Sure. I want to eat the whole fish set meal, grilled fish burger, and... Hui Mao used his claws to list out the menu he had been saving for the past few years. His eyes grew brighter and brighter as he spoke, and Genya couldn't help but laugh. All right. I'll tell them to make it. Hee, right, these fish are all gone after we finish them. Master Grandpa too, we need to keep replenishing them. Look at how smoothly this cat uses the word, we. All right, I'll tell them. I'll have them deliver any fish you like. Hui Mao's grin almost reached his ears as he rubbed his head against Genya's hand. You really are my real grandpa, Genya. Genya was about to say something when he suddenly saw something out of the corner of his eye. He wasn't sure at first, but after a while, he was sure that his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. That egg moved. Hui Mao was still immersed in his beautiful fantasy and didn't react immediately when he heard Genya's words. That egg. Genya pointed at the sea beast egg that Hui Mao had ignored for a long time. It moved on its own just now. Chapter 259. The Sizer family's headquarters were located in Star Region 9 of the Empire. Although the Caesar family was very influential in the empire, and there were several families more famous than the Caesar family was the most influential family in Star Region 9. After Silan and the others entered Star Region 9, more than 90% of the media reports they came across were about the Caesar family, and 80% of them were about the same thing. The Winds of Freedom flying car race was sponsored by the Caesar family. It was a famous race in Star Region 9, and even the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Rumor had it that the ancestors of the Caesar family had been besieged by a disaster before flying was as convenient as it was now. In the end, they sent out a small group of people to search for supplies in flying cars. The first time they tried, only half of the group made it back. The second time, they sent out another group of people to search for supplies, and then a third, a fourth. Finally, after risking their lives again and again to search for supplies, the Caesar family was able to survive. It was also because of this that flying cars became an indispensable tool for the Caesar family. The veracity of the story had yet to be verified, but it had to be said that the Caesar family had an extraordinary passion for flying cars. If a member of the Caesar family couldn't drive a flying car, then they had no right to stay in the family. For some reason, those who couldn't drive a flying car would be ridiculed and ostracized by the entire family. Today, the Caesar family's Whirlwind flying car had become the most famous brand in the entire empire. It had also become a symbol of status for many people. If a nobleman who loved racing didn't own a Whirlwind, they would definitely be laughed at by many people. Those who couldn't afford a Whirlwind would always fantasize about when they could own one of their own. An ancestor of the Caesar family once said that he hoped that the first thing everyone thought of when they talked about flying cars would be Whirlwind. Today, this ancestor's wish was basically fulfilled. It had to be said that the Caesar family's Winds of Freedom flying car race had greatly increased Whirlwind's influence. The race was to prove that Whirlwind wasn't just for show. Whirlwind represented a philosophy, a pursuit, and more importantly, a skill. The Winds of Freedom didn't have a qualifier. Most of the participants were famous racers from other flying car races, including individuals and racing teams. The Caesar family would share a portion of the cost of modifying their cars, and they would also provide some parts for free. All participating cars and racers would wear the Whirlwind logo on their racers' uniforms. It was a golden brand. Whirlwind's influence was truly great. The prize money was generous, the reputation was guaranteed, and if a racer's design caught the eye of the Caesar family's eye, the Caesar family would buy it. There was no way Zhen Xingming and the others would miss out on the Winds of Freedom. They had watched the entire process of the last Winds of Freedom race. Even now, they could still remember the excitement they felt when they watched the race. Silan had only watched Yudo's race when it came to large-scale flying car races. As for the Winds of Freedom that Zhen Xingming and the others mentioned, it was obvious that the scale and investment of this race was much larger than Yudo's Acerella race. Don't tell me that kid Naimi left so early because of this? Ulagannuo asked. Kenansi nodded. It's possible. It's a large-scale race his family is hosting. He has to go back to help, right? But isn't there still some time before the Winds of Freedom? It's too early for Naimi to go back right after the semester exams. There's still a long time before the Winds of Freedom. Zhen Xingming and Bell disagreed with Ulagannuo's words. Based on their understanding of Naimi, the kid wouldn't be too enthusiastic if it was purely to help. In fact, he would delay it until the start of the race just in time to watch the race. If that's the case, then why did Naimi run away in advance? Who knows? We'll meet that kid soon enough. We'll know when we ask him. Zhen Xingming and the others flew straight to the Caesar family's headquarters on the spaceplane. The Caesar family's chief steward was very friendly when he saw Zhen Xingming and the others. After all, they were all members of the royal family, and they were all familiar faces. The head steward was very curious about Silan, but it wasn't his place to ask. A person who could come together with Zhen Xingming and the others and act so casually must have a powerful background. The head steward sent someone to contact Naimi while he was receiving Zhen Xingming and the others. Not long after, the Naimi that Zhen Xingming and the others were talking about appeared before Silan even finished his cup of tea. He looked like he had just woken up. His hair was a mess, and his clothes had been smoothed out by the servants at the last minute, but wrinkles were still visible. Naimi looked very lethargic. Naimi ran out while yelling, but his expression showed that he was surprised by Zhen Xingming and the others' arrival. He looked like he had been constipated for a few days. Naimi greeted Zhen Xingming and the others after he saw them. Then, he turned around on Silan and pulled himself back into the chair like a spineless coward. Silan learned how these people interacted with each other from Naimi's casual greeting. Zhen Xingming and the others didn't reveal their royal status in front of Naimi either. "What's wrong, Naimi?" Belle asked. "I heard that you came back as soon as the semester exams were over. Why are you in such a hurry?" "There's still time before the flying car race. Don't mention it." Naimi waved a hand and said weakly, "For years ago, they said that I was too young to drive a flying car, so I wasn't allowed to participate in the race. That's why I tried my best to participate in the flying car race this time. I even participated in a few small races on a few planets before this, so I definitely qualified. But I was unconditionally rejected again." Zhen Xingming was very calm. "It's basically impossible for people of our status to participate in a race of that scale. My father would probably send someone to drag us back before we could even climb into the car. It's already kind enough that he let us out, so don't even think about participating in the race. There's no way King Fuji would trust someone without skills." Kenancy mocked without holding back. Zhen Xingming glanced sideways at her. "Yeah, I don't have skills, but do you? If you can turn a flying car into a bumper car, don't make a fuss here." "Bullshit. That was an accident." Hey, Kenancy, you're a royal princess at the end of the day. Don't curse every time you open your mouth," Naimi said. "It's none of your business." Celine smiled as she watched these people bicker. At the same time, she also observed the layout of the surroundings. It had to be said that every place in the Sizer family was decorated in a flying car style. The wall lamps looked like the front of a car, and the murals were filled with all kinds of flying cars. Some of the decorations had a mysterious style to them as well. "Hey, Naimi, is your uncle here? We have something we need to talk to him about." Zhen Xingming finally stopped arguing with Kenancy and changed the subject. "My uncle? Which uncle?" Naimi couldn't figure out who Zhen Xingming was talking about. The Sizer family was so big, and there were so many uncles and aunts. Who knew which one he was talking about? That fatty, Flika. Naimi looked at Zhen Xingming warily the moment he heard the name. "Why are you looking for him?" "Let me tell you something first, I've already booked him. If you want him to design a flying car for you, you'll have to queue behind me. By the way, this is the number of people who have asked my fat uncle to design a flying car." Ulagachi looked at Naimi's 2 fingers and said, 20. 200. Naimi swayed his feet. His fat uncle was very popular, and everyone hoped that he would design a car for them. After all, they were all members of the Sizer family, and Naimi would feel proud and honored if his uncle was famous. "TSK, look at you. It's not like you're the one designing it, so stop being so cocky." Zhen Xingming threw a nut at Ulagachi. Naimi caught it and put it in his mouth. He continued to chew on it and continued to show off. "But to be honest, my fat uncle doesn't have the time to design a flying car right now. The Winds of Freedom is about to start, and I'm very busy. My father told me to stop the people who want to ask him to design a flying car, but I can't stop you. If you really want my fat uncle to design a flying car, you can talk to him yourself. I'm not going to be a sinner." Naimi couldn't afford to offend the royal family, and he didn't want to be punished by his father. "Naimi, is your fat uncle very busy? So busy that he can't even come and meet us?" Belle asked. "Of course he'll come if you ask him as a prince," Naimi answered seriously. "Then forget it. We're probably not going to get our dream flying car if we keep putting on airs here. Ulagachi knew Fleeka's personality very well. What do you think, Silen? Zhen Xingming turned to Silen and asked. Naimi looked at Zhen Xingming and the others' expressions before re-evaluating Silen. He couldn't understand why these royal descendants were treating Silen like this. It wasn't easy to gain the approval of Zhen Xingming and the others, and they hadn't been this polite to anyone other than the royals before. It was obvious that Silen wasn't a member of the royal family either. Silen thinks about Zhen Xingming's words for a moment before saying, since he doesn't have the time, let's go find him. Sure, it's not like we have anything better to do anyway. Why don't we check out the pre-race preparations for the Winds of Freedom? Bell was very much in agreement. His eyes were sparkling with excitement, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Zhen Xingming and the others didn't object either, so they clapped their hands and headed straight for Fleeka's place. Coincidentally, Fleeka was at home today. He had been investigating the Winds of Freedom for a very long time, and he was very tired as of late. He was planning to go home and rest for a while, and he had ordered his men to stand guard outside his house and ignore anyone who tried to enter. Fleeka was annoyed to death by those nobles who pretended to be smart and cool, so he had a backer and an excuse to stop them from entering his family's territory. His family had even sent a guard squad to help him keep them away. It didn't matter if they were nobles or relatives, they didn't care no matter how much money they had to pay to stop them from leaving. Money? The Sizer family really didn't care. There were a lot of people watching from the entrance of Fleeka's manor. Most of them were sent here to scout for information, and they would report to their master the moment Fleeka showed up. The guards of the Sizer family standing outside the mansion looked like they wanted nothing more than to shoot these shifty-eyed people at them. That was why the guards' expressions were dark and solemn. It looked like they were ready to kill anyone who dared to come near them. However, when a flying car flew over and stopped right in front of the entrance, the guards felt bitter inside. They were all too familiar with this car. This little ancestor had caused a lot of trouble in the past few days. Although they knew that it was Naimi, the guards didn't open the door at first. They just stood there and looked straight ahead. However, their backs were sweating, and they were ready to argue with this little ancestor. However, when Naimi rolled down the car window, the guards felt even more bitter inside when they saw who was sitting inside. This lineup is seriously unstoppable. If Naimi was alone, the guards could stop him. But the people inside the car were all descendants of the royal family, and all three of them at once. If they stopped him, there was no telling what kind of bad news or rumors would spread one day. Naimi saw the guards' pale faces and knew that they were in a difficult situation, so he said, "I'll take responsibility for everything." "I was waiting for you to say that." The guards quickly let them through after hearing Naimi's words. Some of the passers-by outside craned their necks to see what was going on, but the windows of the flying car were all closed, and they couldn't see who was inside. Fleeka had just fallen asleep when he heard his beloved nephew shouting at the top of his lungs. "Uncle Fatty! Uncle Fatty! My dear Uncle Fleeka, your smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew is here to see you." Right now, Fleeka really wanted to throw his smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew into the toilet. He's calling his soul. Fleeka covered his ears and rolled on the bed. Unfortunately for him, Naimi was too familiar with this place, and the servants didn't stop him at all. Therefore, Fleeka's desire to get some rest couldn't be fulfilled. Fleeka sat up in his pajamas and swayed to the door in a daze. When he opened the door, he saw the people standing outside. He blinked and blinked again. Fleeka yelled and jumped to his feet, the fat on his face jiggling like waves. "It really is you, kid. Hello, we meet again," Silen said. Fleeka pushed aside Naimi, who was the closest to the door, and strode towards Silen. He completely ignored the four royal descendants who were standing at the side. Then, Fleeka patted Silen's body hard and squeezed Silen's arm. He grinned and said, "Ha, I knew I wasn't dreaming." Naimi's face twitched. "My dear uncle, I'm your nephew, your blood. How dare you ignore the smart, cute, handsome, and charming nephew standing in front of you?" That being said, Naimi was even more curious about Silen now. Although this uncle of his was kind, he wouldn't show his true feelings on his face. However, even an idiot could tell that this uncle was genuinely happy about Silen's arrival. Didn't he push his own nephew to the side? Uncle Fatty, do you know each other? Naimi looked at Flika and Silen before sweeping his gaze across Jen Xingming and the others. Yes, we're old friends. Hee, it's been a long time since we last met, so we should have a good chat. What a coincidence, I have some business to take care of together, so I don't have to worry so much with you around. What a timely rein. Flika dragged Silen and ran towards the workshop. Naimi was incredibly shocked by Flika's words. He didn't even have time to digest Flika's words before he saw Flika running towards the workshop in his pajamas. It was common knowledge that Flika would change into his work clothes every time he went to the workshop because it was dirty and radioactive. Hey, Uncle Fatty. You're still wearing your pajamas. Naimi ran towards Flika and stopped him. In the end, Flika didn't change into his work clothes, but he didn't enter the workshop either. After all, there were other guests here, and they were all royal guests no less. It was only right and proper for him to leave them behind. He invited Jen Xingming and the others to rest in the workshop and listen to their reason for coming here. A flying car, huh? Flika paused for a moment before continuing, of course I can make a flying car for you, but I absolutely don't have the time right now. You should have heard about this from Naimi. Jen Xingming and the others nodded in understanding. If I want to build a flying car, I'll have to wait until after the Winds of Freedom race. Moreover, I'll have to postpone it for some time after the race. That's because after every race, I'll have to conduct a statistical analysis on the performance of several models and their performances in the race. Then, I'll absorb the models that are worth developing and modify the existing models. Jen Xingming and the others couldn't wait any longer, but they couldn't say anything. Flika was already giving them enough face by telling them all this. If it were anyone else, Flika would have pushed it back again and again even if he put on a smiling face. That was why they had to endure Flika's promise even if the deadline had to be pushed back. But Silen, you don't need me to design a flying car, do you? You should be able to do a great job with your abilities. Hey, why don't we design one together? Chapter 260. Silen was a little tempted by Flika's suggestion, but he also understood that he was far inferior to Flika when it came to designing a flying car. The best he could do was to modify some of the assembly processes and make them more complete. Silen was well aware of his own limitations when it came to designing a flying car as a whole. In order to design a good racing car, one must not only have a good understanding of flying cars, but also experience. Silen had never designed a real racing car before. He had only tinkered with a few small parts in Mo Heng's workshop, and that could only be considered partial engineering. He had absolutely no experience in designing a complete racing car. Silen didn't know much about racing. Even though he had heard a lot about it and read a lot of information about it, he could only design a better flying car after experiencing it for himself. Different weather conditions, different geographical environments, and different habits of racers all had different standards. After Flika showed some documents to Silen, Silen knew that he wasn't suited to design a flying car right now. In the Winds of Freedom race, during the course of the race, the flying cars would pass through rainforests, erupting muddy swamps, howling glaciers and snowy lands, vast deserts, winding mountain roads, and other different weather conditions. Moreover, the complicated weather and geographical environments were not the only thing that was different from the flying car races Silen had experienced in the past. Basically, there were two people on each flying car. Every racing car would have a driver and a navigator, each of them performing their own duties. The racer only had to drive, and he needed to fully display his superb driving skills. The so-called navigator, on the other hand, not only had to arrange some trivial matters during the race, but he also had to point out the correct direction and route for the racer during each stage, and provide timely and accurate information about the road conditions ahead during the stage. This kind of cooperation undoubtedly lightened the driver's burden in this long-distance race. Almost all the participating racers were paired up with each other. After all, this race was too much of a test for a driver's ability, and there were a lot of unexpected situations that could occur during the race. If the driver was alone, not only would he have to fly the car safely under those dangerous conditions, he would also have to pay attention to any external factors that might change at any moment. Not everyone's brain capacity was as great as a robot's. Therefore, the two of them were the best and safest combination. It wasn't easy for a team to nurture an outstanding racer, and it wasn't easy to modify a racing car either. While they were fighting for the championship, they certainly weren't willing to take on such a huge risk. If a two-passenger flying car wanted to gain an advantage in a race, then the design had to be different from a single-passenger flying car. Fleeka had been trying to convince Scylla to join him and design the modified flying car with him all this time. It wasn't every day that they ran into each other, and Fleeka wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away so easily. For a very long time after he was forcibly captured by his son, Fleck's mind would always picture Scylla assembling the parts whenever he was assembling a flying car. Then, he would look at the people around him assembling the car, and he could only sigh and sigh again and again. After all, after seeing better techniques, a person's bottom line would naturally rise. That was why Fleeka's emotions were very unstable during that time. Other than his sighs, the dissatisfaction and regret in his eyes when he looked at the self-proclaimed excellent assemblers was enough to give anyone goosebumps. Everyone except Belle looked surprised by Fleeka's persistence, especially Naimi. After he saw his fat uncle's reaction, he even winked at Zhen Xingming and the others as if to say, "I didn't think you'd invite an expert over." Zhen Xingming looked very innocent. Belle had told him a bit about Scylla, but he didn't think that Scylla would be able to convince the famous Fleeka to coax and pester him. Scylla looked at the information about the race and some of the past champion flying cars in his hands. Most of these flying cars couldn't even be called flying cars anymore. They had different shapes, and they were completely different from normal flying cars. Crescent moon-shaped and knife-shaped ones were the more normal ones. Seeing that Scylla was silent, Fleeka stopped talking and moistened his throat with a cup. Judging from Scylla's expression, he was probably thinking about it carefully. "I'm sure he'll change his mind if I push him a little harder." Just when Fleeka put down his cup and was about to continue, Scylla suddenly asked, "How do I qualify for the race?" "You want to participate in the race?" Fleeka completely forgot what he was about to say. He only knew that Scylla was a great assembler, but he had never seen Scylla race before. Judging from Scylla's background, Scylla shouldn't be able to race, should he? It wasn't that Fleeka looked down on Scylla, it was because Scylla's living conditions were too poor. Racing a car cost a lot of money, and Fleeka had always thought that Scylla's age didn't have the time to practice his assembly skills. Moreover, Scylla's first impression didn't make him look like any of the other racers Fleeka had seen at his age. Fleeka wasn't the only one who was surprised. Zhen Xingming, Belle and the others were just as surprised. Before Scylla got involved with the Zhen family, he shouldn't have been able to participate in a big race like the Winds of Freedom, right? Moreover, Zhen Xingming and the others had never heard of Scylla in some of the smaller races. Could it be that Scylla was one of those unknown races? "Scylla, you need to think this through carefully. This race is very dangerous," Zhen Xingming said seriously. If the race wasn't as dangerous as it was, Zhen Xingming and the others would have willingly participated despite their family's objections. However, it was exactly because they knew the risks that they couldn't afford to risk their lives when their families had increased their opposition. This was an exciting and high-risk race, and it was enough for them to experience the excitement of it from the outside. A lot of people's legs would turn to jelly if they were to actually participate in it. Moreover, if something really happened to Scylla, how was he going to explain it to his second grandfather? "Do you really want to participate? Are you serious?" Fleeka asked seriously. Scylla nodded. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Zhen Xingming's face was bitter. Of course he was worried. In order to make things easier for Zhen Xingming, Scylla contacted Zhenya. To Zhen Xingming's surprise, Zhenya only asked Scylla if he really wanted to participate. After he confirmed that Sillin really wanted to participate, he even said, "Be careful and have fun." Zhen Xingming felt that his second grandfather was too lenient with Sillin. What he didn't know was that Zhenya had agreed to the race directly because he understood Sillin's personality very well. Moreover, Zhenya felt that Sillin needed something to vent his pent-up frustrations. After all, there were too many stories about Sillin. He had suddenly arrived in this unfamiliar galaxy, and he didn't even know if he could return to his original galaxy. Moreover, Sillin had subconsciously touched the bone crystal hanging around his neck after Zhenya woke up. Zhenya was aware of this, but he couldn't do anything about it. Zhenya was in hibernation, and the child was truly gone. Zhen Xingming didn't say anything else since Zhenya had agreed to it. At the same time, after a moment of worry, Zhen Xingming and the others suddenly felt a surge of excitement. Sillin was going to participate in the race, and this was a true brothers' competition. It was much more exciting than watching someone else compete. Zhen Xingming was already imagining himself pointing at the speeding car and shouting, "Look, that's my bro." It would be impossible for anyone else to participate in the race under these circumstances, but Sillin had Fleeka's help, so it wasn't entirely impossible. The name list had been decided a long time ago, and it was announced to the public as well. Every participant had a name list, and it was a little troublesome to force Sillin into the list. But Fleeka would definitely help him if he really wanted to participate in the competition. No matter what, he was the vice chairman of the organizing committee. The Winds of Freedom committee would definitely give him face if he showed up. Fleeka thought that he'd just have to put up with those people's faces for the time being. But if Sillin wins a prize in a race, those racing teams will probably die of depression. Kenancy smiled. But it will also hurt some people's interests. Belle and the others were more or less aware of some of the secret transactions that took place. For example, gambling. Sillin shook his head, "I just want to participate in the race. My name isn't on the official name list, and I don't care if I win or not. I'm not interested in awards at all." Fleeka understood Sillin's intentions immediately. He wanted to experience the race himself in preparation for designing a flying car. Only by participating in the race would he be able to come up with a stronger idea and experience. Fleeka had done the same thing when he was younger. "Alright, I understand what you're trying to say. Leave it to me." While saying this, Fleeka went into his room and contacted someone to take care of some paperwork. A while later, Fleeka came out of his room and said that he had spoken to the decision-makers of the organizing committee. Right now, all Sillin needed to do was to design a flying car according to his own preferences. "I have a few prototype flying cars that aren't finished yet, but you can take a look and choose one to participate in the race," Fleeka said. Fleeka's main workplace wasn't on the Sizer family's planet, so everything related to the Winds of Freedom race would be held at the host venue, the planet also named Whirlwind. Since the decision was made, and Fleeka was going back to work anyway, he called Sillin, Zhen Xingming and the others to come with him. Under Fleeka's guidance, they didn't need to check their identities at all. To better prepare for the Winds of Freedom race, the entire planet was under a semi-closed management. Only the relevant personnel were allowed to enter. The racing teams, maintenance personnel, and the organizers were allowed to enter, but the people who had booked tickets to watch the race weren't allowed to enter just yet. It was obvious that Zhen Xingming and the others couldn't sit still after they entered Whirlwind Planet. The moment they arrived, they couldn't help but recall the craziness, adrenaline overflowing, excitement and roaring that they felt like their lungs were about to burst out of their lungs when they came here to watch the race 4 years ago. This was the influence this Whirlwind Planet had on every visitor. Anyone who had watched the race even once would have a deep impression of it, especially the flying car enthusiasts and youngsters like Zhen Xingming. The emotions of young people were the easiest to stir up. Right now, the first thing Fleeka needed to do wasn't to bring Sillin and the others to his workshop to look at the cars. Instead, he needed to bring Sillin to the organizing committee to obtain the documents and certificates. Without them, Sillin wasn't allowed to enter the racetrack at all. The organizing committee had been very busy lately, and they had to deal with racing teams and racers from all over the world every day. Fortunately, Flicka was the one who showed up, so everyone gave him face. The chief of the organizing committee was the one who brought him the documents and certificates. The chief was an old member of the Sizer family, and he had been in charge of the Winds of Freedom race for many years. This time, the chief had no choice but to show up in person because Flicka had interceded. Right now, he was the only one who could keep Flicka in check. Many people in the organizing committee didn't say anything about Flicka's behavior on the surface, but they all had their own opinions about it. Therefore, the chief had to explain some things to Flicka so that he could forestall such a situation from happening again. Flicka had expected the chief's cold expression since a long time ago, so he could only smile and pretend that he didn't care when the chief handed them the documents. "We made an exception this time because of you. Please don't let something like this happen again." "I know. It was a special situation this time, and I'll explain it to you in detail later. I'm also aware of the stakes involved, so there won't be a next time." Flicka smiled and reached out to accept the documents, but the chief ignored Flicka's outstretched hand and stared straight at Sillin instead. His meaning was obvious: "You're the one who's participating in the race this time, don't you even have a list of documents?" Sillin didn't want to put Flicka in a difficult position, so he walked up to him and gave him a simple courtesy, thanked him, and accepted the document with both hands. Flicka was a senior and the chief of the organizing committee, not to mention that he was the one who helped him with the paperwork. Etiquette was a must. The chief's expression softened a little when he saw how calm and polite Sillin was, and how he accepted the documents with both hands. He didn't look like a good-for-nothing rich kid whose eyes grew on his forehead. However, his pupils shrank when he saw the pattern on Sillin's finger. Although he didn't show much reaction on his face, Sillin could clearly sense that the chief's aura had relaxed quite a bit. He didn't look as serious as before, and he didn't look like someone had stolen a piece of shit from his wall. Flicka didn't know about this, and he didn't notice what kind of tattoo Sillin's finger was at all. After all, young people like to tattoo themselves these days, so he didn't pay much attention to it. However, the chief's attitude was clearly a lot better than before, and his tone had become a lot warmer. Flicka was a little puzzled by this, but he didn't probe too deeply into it. An old man at his age was always unpredictable. After the procedures were done, Flicka left the place with Sillin and went to his workshop. Zhen Xingming and the others waited in the flying car outside the office building. They didn't follow them inside. After Sillin and Flicka had left, the chief immediately contacted the Sizer family. Due to their age and experience, he knew a lot more than Beaver and Flicka did. Naturally, he knew what the pattern on Sillin's finger represented. If the pattern was real, then they would have to re-evaluate Sillin as a person. Flicka led Sillin to his workshop. Unlike a small workshop, this place took up a lot of space, and there were some open-air repair points at the periphery. It could be considered a temporary repair station. A lot of racing teams had come here to familiarize themselves with the environment since a long time ago. The racers and crew had to get used to the planet's environment and adjust their bodies to peak condition before the official race. This wasn't a trivial matter, because sometimes, a single grain of sand could decide a race's success or failure. Flicka's mood had obviously improved a lot after Sillin's arrival. He didn't look tired at all, and he even gave Sillin some tips to pay attention to while he was working in front of the flying car. He even told Sillin what kind of weather and terrain each modified part was best suited for. The tournament had a certain limit on the size, weight, displacement, power, and so on of a modified racecar. Every racecar team and racer was free to do whatever they wanted within these limits. Right now, Flicka was giving Sillin a general direction so that he wouldn't take any detours. The people who had worked under Flicka for a long time were guessing which family's young master he belonged to when they saw how Flicka was treating Sillin. Even Naimi was ignored by Flicka right now. At first, Zhen Xingming and the others had followed Flicka to observe and learn a thing or two in the name of enriching their brains. But after 2 days, they lost their patience. Bell might know a thing or two about racing, but he preferred watching the racers more than anything else. Therefore, Zhen Xingming and the others gave up under Flicka's barrage of technical jargon and went to watch the racers practice together. Fleeka had a lot of work to teach Silen, and he didn't want to take up all of Fleeka's time. Therefore, 3 days later, Silen said that he would practice with the maintenance staff at the periphery of the workshop first. He wanted to learn more about the racing cars while he was repairing them. Fleeka didn't object. He really was busy. Silen's assembly skills could be called a classic. It was so classic that it looked like a priceless work of art. The workers here no longer thought of Silen as a short-lived brat, and they answered all of Silen's questions enthusiastically. Today, Silen had just finished repairing a flying car. He got up to drink a bottle of water and take a break when a fiery red flying car flew into the workshop. A 15 or 16-year-old girl dressed in racing attire hurriedly got out of the car and scanned her surroundings. When she saw Silen in his work attire, she walked straight towards Silen. Chapter 261. Hey, it's you. Yes, it's you. Come here for a second. Silen put down his water bottle and looked at the female racer who was wearing a racing uniform and a helmet. He couldn't see her face clearly. Judging from her voice, she sounded like a pretty young girl. Come here and help us look after the flying car. We're in a hurry. The girl said before dragging Silen to the side of the flying car. While Silen was familiarizing himself with the racing flying cars, Fleeka tossed him a set of uniform that fitted him just like the other workers. He had to pay attention to his own protection during maintenance, and there were some things that couldn't be touched carelessly. Those with weak immune systems would get sick if they came into contact with them, such as local radiation, a pilot error, or a heavy metal gas leak from the car's high temperature caused by an accident. The Sizer family's uniforms were very expensive. Any one of them could easily cost more than 5 digits. It was clear just how rich the Sizer family was. The back of Silen's uniform and cap was printed with the words, Whirlwind Repair Point, and the code of the point. Therefore, the girl had directly pulled Silen over and treated him as a staff member of this place. The flying car was shaped like a triangular pyramid. When it landed on the ground, it changed slightly to make it more agile and stable. When the girl had dragged Silen to the side of the flying car, the roof was lowered to reveal another girl sitting inside. However, she wasn't sitting in the driver's seat, but the navigator's seat. She had taken off her helmet, revealing a very gentle and pretty face of about 15 or 16 years old. It was hard to imagine that a girl who looked a little shy in front of strangers was a navigator. After the girl had dragged Silen to the side, she turned on the self-scan display on the control panel. The self-scan value was only 8.2. Both Fleeka's workplace and outdoor repair point were located on the plains of the planet where the environment was slightly better, but there were a lot of other places that were much worse. Although the main track had been sealed off, the drivers who were familiar with the race could only practice their skills in the areas close to the main track. Even that meant that they had to bear a lot of risks. Even the slightest problem with their flying car had to be dealt with extreme caution, or they would lose their lives before they could even begin. Therefore, as long as a flying car's self-inspection system displayed a value below 9, it would have to be repaired at the nearest repair point. This was the most appropriate and dependable way to deal with the situation. Silen looked at the detailed list of self-tests and asked, when did the self-test score fall below 9? When we passed through the glacier area, we began to descend. After flying past the glacier area, we began to descend rapidly. After that, we changed our route to come here. After all, this is the nearest repair point. Hey, what's going on? How long will the repairs take? We are in a hurry to go back. It was almost evening in this area, so it was no wonder that the girl was in such a hurry. Once night fell, flying would be much more difficult. I'll take a look first. Silen looked at the control panel and entered a series of commands to verify the operation of each part of the flying car. This flying car's configuration was pretty good, and both the primary and secondary operating systems were the latest. The primary and secondary operating systems had been installed according to the habits of the two girls. Male and female racers had different habits and mastery of operating systems, so the appropriate operating systems would also be different. The two girls watched as Silen quickly flipped through the list of characters that they couldn't understand. They looked at each other. This guy, he's not just putting on an act, is he? He flipped through it so quickly, they couldn't see it clearly at all. They couldn't see it clearly, but for Silen, this was just his normal speed. His fingers suddenly stopped. Silen looked at one of the lines, then entered a command on the control panel and walked to the back of the car. The moment he placed his fingers on the car, Silen was able to clearly understand the structure of this car, and a detailed structural diagram had already appeared in his mind. Therefore, he quickly found the right spot for the flying car. He pushed it at a seemingly random angle, and the outer shell of the rear of the flying car popped up. To prevent Silen from tampering with the flying car, the helmeted girl stood on the side to supervise him. After the outer shell popped up, Silen quickly removed some of the surface components and placed them on the open tool tray next to him. The girl standing next to him raised her hand and put it down again. "Hey, be careful. Don't be too careless." From her point of view, Silen must not have taken the components seriously by removing them so quickly. This kind of careless behavior would definitely affect the components. Her brother had said that even the slightest damage to the components would reduce their performance when they were assembled and installed on the car. "Tobia." The girl sitting in the car called out in a low voice and shook her head, indicating that she shouldn't disturb the maintenance staff. It wouldn't be too late to ask for compensation if there really was serious damage, but it was very bad behavior to disturb the maintenance staff when they were doing maintenance. If there really was damage and someone kept chattering on the side during the repair process, the maintenance staff might also shift the blame to the person who was disturbing them. Tobia also remembered those problems after receiving the signal and stopped talking. She let out a humph and stared at Silen's hand movements. But she had just retracted her attention when she saw that Silen had already stopped removing the components. There was an empty space on the flying car, and the maintenance staff was typing something into the communicator on their wrist. Every staff member in the repair station wore a specialized communicator on their wrist. Not only could they use this communicator to communicate with each other, they could also order the service robots stationed at the warehouse. As long as the maintenance staff keyed in the name and model of the required components, the command would be directly transmitted to the warehouse, and the service robots would quickly deliver the components. There was no need for the staff to carry the components and run back and forth. It didn't take long for the service robots to deliver the components Silen needed. It was very simple stuff, a double wire, a few small components, and a small cleaner. Perhaps Silen's actions had piqued the girl's curiosity, but she also got out of the car and came to Tobia's side to watch Silen repair the car. After Silen removed the surface parts, he understood the cause of the car's problem. When the flying car was passing through the glacial zone, one of the components had loosened during the thermostat activation process, causing a very small crack to appear on the outer shell of the flying car. This small crack was not to be underestimated. In such an environment, even a very small crack would allow the cold to penetrate through the loose component and freeze the original double wire to pieces. The aging of the double wire was one reason, but so was the loosening of the component. In truth, the most important reason for these problems was that the combination of the surface components wasn't the most suitable for defense, even if they were using the best components. One should only ask for the best, not the most expensive. Even though the loose components and frozen wires weren't crucial components, and the flying car's self-inspection process wouldn't produce any major warnings, the special powder of these double rows of wires, after being charged, would stick to the other components closer to the inside. Moreover, it would cause a large-scale magnetic attenuation and damage to the flying car's internal stability, causing the flying car to enter a serious state. The self-inspection coefficient value would drop below 9.0. Silen used the cleaner to clean up the powder adhering to the inner component, then replaced it with a new wire. He also changed the model and configuration of the surface components so that they were the best match. This way, it would be very difficult for them to loosen unless there was a serious collision. The two girls watched as Silen casually placed the components there like building blocks. The components seemed to be connected very securely, and the ports were very suitable. Sillin closed the outer shell after he was done assembling the components. He went to the control panel inside the flying car and began to clean up the minor problems in the main and secondary systems. 10 seconds later, he pressed the self-inspection button. The self-inspection system scanned again and showed a value of 9. 7, alright, this value should be able to last until you return to the base, Sillin said. Ah. The girl named Tobia seemed to find it hard to believe. She moved closer to the display panel and saw that the big 9. 7 was still there. It didn't change no matter how hard she tried. A little cleaning, a few unimportant components, and it's done. Tobia jumped into the flying car, started it up, and tested it. It really was done. The entire repair process took less than 10 minutes. Tobia had estimated that it would take at least 30 minutes, but it took less than a third of the estimated time. The two girls sat inside the car, raised the roof, and a sealed Mitsubishi cone-shaped flying car rose into the air. Thanks. Tobia's voice came from the external speaker. You're welcome. After everything was done, Sillin walked back to the field. They were wrapping up work already, and the sky was getting dark. That was it for today. He still had to help Fleeka tonight. There were still more than 20 days until the actual race, so Sillin planned to familiarize himself with the various racing cars first. Sharpening one's axe wouldn't hold up one's work, and Fleeka believed that Sillin had the ability to do so. Before that though, he still needed to find a navigator. Of course, it didn't matter if he couldn't find a suitable navigator in the end. He could handle it by himself. It would be even better if Huimao was here. Right now, Sillin was basically fighting alone. Perhaps Fleeka would arrange for some people to be the logistics team's maintenance team. The race was a long flight, and accidents were bound to happen all the time. That was why there was a repair point set up every other circuit, and every team's logistics team would be stationed there. If a team's car needed to be repaired or modified, they would do their best to get it done as soon as possible. After all, there was a minimum time limit for the race. If a racer couldn't reach it within this time limit, they would be eliminated, and the eliminated racer wouldn't be included in the final ranking. The team's chances of winning were much higher. After all, they had worked together for a long time to form a tacit understanding. A lot of things could happen in a race, and a single person's strength was too limited. Sillin did not have absolute confidence that he could fight for a place in the top few, but he should be able to finish the race safely. As for the ranking, Sillin didn't care about it at all. The ranking would be based on the total number of points the racer earned. All participating cars had to follow the race's prescribed route strictly and arrive at the designated stop within the time limit. The top 10 racers of each race would receive 40, 30, 25, 20, 16, 12, 8, 4, 2, and 1 points respectively. At the end of the race, the total number of points earned by each race would be the racer's final result. Moreover, they had to complete their car's maintenance and testing within the allotted time. The higher a racer's ranking was, the more points they earned, and the more advantage they had. After all, the first and 10th place racers were separated by 40 times. It was a pretty big number. Of course, not every racer was an all-rounder. Every racer had their own areas of expertise, and it was possible that the 10th place racer of one race would be the first place racer of the next. Sillin let out a long sigh. He would train here for another 3 days before he started assembling his flying car. After that, he would go familiarize himself with the race's environment. That night, when Sillin walked into Fleeka's personal workshop, he saw Naimi, who he hadn't seen for a couple of days, grinning like he was afraid that someone wouldn't know that something good had happened to him. Sillin. After seeing Sillin, Naimi hurriedly jumped down from a big box and ran in front of Sillin. The excited expression on his face made him look very silly and stupid. However, Naimi didn't mind his silly and stupid smile at all. He ran over and patted Sillin excitedly. "Brother! Let's team up!" "Sillin! What's going on?" Coincidentally, Gulaika came over and told Sillin the reason. After watching the race for a couple of days and quarreling with some noble children, Naimi contacted his father and tried to persuade him. In the end, he cried, threw a tantrum, and acted like a hoodlum until his father finally relented. However, he had one condition: Naimi could only be a navigator and not a racer. In the past races statistics, the accident rate of a racer was twice as high as a navigator's. At first, Naimi refused, but this was his father's bottom line. Otherwise, he wouldn't even think about it. In the end, Naimi gave in. But when he remembered that Silan was also participating in the race, and that he hadn't found a suitable navigator yet, Naimi eagerly came over and asked for Flika's permission first. With Flika's persuasion, Silan would agree to it as well. Silan, Naimi's grades in the affiliated schools are crap, he looks unreliable, he's always frivolous, and he looks a little stupid when he smiles, but he's still someone who has been exposed to racing since he was young. He knows a lot about racing, and his analytical skills aren't bad either. Flika said. At first, Naimi's eyebrows nearly shot up when he heard Flika's evaluation of him. Uncle Fatty, you're my biological uncle. How can you belittle your own nephew like this? But Naimi finally understood when he heard the latter half of the conversation. Yes, this is called strategy. Suppress your desires first. As expected, it's Uncle Fatty. Naimi nodded in satisfaction. Then, he stared at Silan with a hopeful look in his eyes that said, "You're committing a sin if you don't agree." The corner of Silan's eyes twitched a little, but he finally nodded under the expectant gazes of his uncle and nephew. Hee hee, hee hee hee. Naimi started laughing like an idiot again. Flika shot a glance at his nephew before shaking his head. Then, he said to Silan, "This kid has some real talent." His father carried him in his arms and drove him fast even before he was weaned off his mother's milk. It's just that his family never allowed him to participate in this dangerous race. In fact, Silan only wanted to give Flika face when he agreed to let Naimi become his companion navigator. But Silan had to admit that Naimi did have the goods during the assembly process. Naimi had provided a lot of practical suggestions when Silan was designing the flying car. In a flying car race, a powerful engine, good energy blocks, and expensive components weren't the only things that could win a race. It also had to adapt to the weather and emergency situations of each circuit. At the same time, it was also a test of the driver and navigator's ability to adapt to danger and obstacles, the driver's driving skills, the navigator's analysis, and their cooperation. After a few days of getting along with Naimi, Silan had learned a lot more about him. The members of the Sizer family were talented when it came to flying cars. Of course, there was no telling how much they would be able to use this talent to their fullest potential. The first race is Rainbow Heaven, also known as the Rainbow of Beginnings. There are 7 racing tracks with 7 different colors. However, the 7 tracks are intersecting with each other, and we don't know what kind of obstacles or how many bends there are at the end of each track. It's all random. If you're lucky, you'll get out of Rainbow Heaven early, and if you're unlucky, you'll have to waste a lot more time. It's purely a matter of luck. The other end of the track will change after you enter it, so even the designer wouldn't have guessed which track would save you more time. After the rainbow track, the first ranking for the flying cars would be revealed. This was purely a contest of luck. In order to avoid hesitation at the start and reduce the self-blame after choosing a complex track, many teams would discuss which track to choose before the start of the race. That way, there wouldn't be any subsequent arguments. "What color are we going to choose, Silan?" Silan thinks for a moment. This was a matter of luck. Everyone who could participate in this race had real skills, so the temporary ranking of the first race could only be decided based on luck. So what color should we choose? Let's choose the first color we saw when we opened our eyes. Are you going to open your eyes or should I? I don't remember anything for a while after I wake up. I'll open my eyes. All right. Naimi unfolded the preliminary design again and continued, "We need to configure the tires well too. If we don't grip the ground tightly during the ice and snow race, we'll be blown away. Therefore, it's best to drive on land during that race. As for tires, I suggest we use narrow-nailed tires. It'll increase the pressure on the surface of the tires and give them better grip. After the discussion was done, their flying car design was finally finalized. Fleeka's expression turned odd when he saw the final design. Chapter 262. Fleeka didn't participate in the design of their flying car. He only answered some of Scylla and Naime's questions from time to time, and didn't offer any opinions on the design itself. He just wanted to see what kind of flying car these two kids could come up with on their own. To be honest, Fleeka had been looking forward to it for a long time. Sometimes, he would even think of Scylla and Naime's designs when he was modifying the racing cars that were delivered to him. But the moment he received the design firsthand, all his fantasies and expectations were silenced in an instant. How should he put this? Based on Apleka's understanding of Naime, the final flying car should be a new design with the kids' input and suggestions, shouldn't it? After all, young people tended to prefer the most flamboyant style. They liked big tail fins, flying wings, fins and so on, and colorful ones at that. But the final design he received was far from what Fleeka had imagined it to be. This design would have been an oddity among flying cars on a normal day, but it was completely outdated in the winds of freedom. As early as a few decades ago, someone had designed this type of flying car, and during that time, there were several competitions that used this type of car. However, the results of the subsequent competitions weren't very ideal. This type of flying car won good results in the early days as well, but after its peak, all kinds of new and eye-catching flying cars appeared one after another, and this type of flying car became a nostalgic product in people's hearts. Many other styles were derived from this type of flying car, such as the crescent-shaped flying car, the knife-shaped flying car, and the bullet-shaped flying car. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Fleeka wasn't disappointed that Scylla and Naime had come up with something like this after working day and night. The 3D image of the design in his hand showed a disc-shaped object. It was the result of Scylla and Naime's days of tinkering. In the modern era, this disc-shaped object was nicknamed Vegfritter by many car lovers. If someone were to say that a car was the same as Vegfritter, it would be an insult, a mockery, and a disdain to the extreme. It wasn't a good word at all. The reason the Winds of Freedom was famous wasn't just because of its challenging and exciting racing process. There was another important reason, and that was because it was conceptual. What does it mean to be conceptual? It was a combination of vehicle manufacturing technology and technological development. Its design could be freed from the constraints of manufacturing technology, allowing drivers and designers to display their talents to their heart's content, almost exaggeratedly, so that the flying car they designed could display its unique and crazy charm. It was a kind of avant-garde artwork born at the intersection of the present and the future, dreams and reality. At least based on the appearance, there would be more people selling this car when it was officially put into production in the future. This was one of the Sizer family's viewpoints, but did Naime not know about it even though he was born and raised in the same family? Impossible. Every time he saw those strange-looking and unconventional flying cars, he would get very excited. Scylla and Naime seemed to have expected Fleeka's strange expression from the start. Instead of worrying, they continued to smile at Fleeka. Fleeka was about to say something when he saw the duo's reaction, but he swallowed his words and continued reading. After all, the first part of the book was just an introduction, and he hoped that there would be a surprise later on. The latter part of the book gave Fleeka a completely different feeling, but his surprise was far greater than his joy. The more he read, the more serious Fleeka's expression became. When he was finally done, Fleeka let out a long sigh and looked at Scylla and Naime. Are you really going to design something like this? The innovation of a racing car isn't for you to waste, take risks, and imagine things that are beyond the limits of the rules. No, Uncle Fatty, this is the perfect flying car in my mind right now. I think that it can completely replace a spaceplane, or should I say that it's more like a combination of a triceratops and a small spaceplane. It has both the Triceratops and the spaceplane's functions, and its speed is about the same as a spaceplane's except that it doesn't have warp speed. Of course, if we invest a lot of money into it, we can also give it warp speed. Naimi grew more and more excited as he spoke. Stop. I don't care if your flying car has warp speed or not, or if it's as fast as a spaceplane. I'm just asking if you two can complete a project like this. I told you before that I won't interfere with your design. Are you trying to hire an academician from the RAS's engineering department? If that's the case, this car will be nothing more than a money-burning failure that can't even compare to a normal spaceplane. Fleeka's words were a little heavy. Normally, he wouldn't say the word failure in front of a racer or designer. However, he couldn't stop himself from saying the word failure when he looked at the design in his hands and the two people he had high hopes for. Also, you should know that every flying car that participates in the competition will have an introduction before the competition. In this introduction, there will be a rough report on the cost of the flying car. According to the rules, the cost can't exceed 100 million. The best range is between 10 million and 50 million. That way, there will be more investment value. But Fleeka flipped over two of the blueprints and said, I estimate that it will cost no less than 200 million MB to complete these designs. Don't even think about lying, the organizing committee isn't an idiot. I've shamelessly helped you once already, and I won't allow you to make an exception this time. Calm down, Uncle Fatty. Mind your emotions and take deep breaths, calm down my ass. Fleeka really regretted allowing these two kids to participate in the race this time. Wasn't this just asking for trouble? After taking a deep breath, Fleeka put a hand to his forehead. He didn't know whether he should say that these two kids were arrogant or ignorant. He raised a hand to suppress his irritation and continued, all right, let's not talk about the construction cost for now. You don't care about money anyway, so let's talk about this technical problem first. Even the designers and builders of the Sizer family aren't completely confident that they can complete this design in a short time, let alone me. Maybe you should ask the legendary Black Viper or an expert from the RAS to guide you. Even if they're willing to guide you, it's not like you can complete it in 10 days, is it? There are only 15 days left until the race, and you need to familiarize yourself with the car, the environment, and the terrain in the last 5 days. You don't have the time to build more. Naimi scratched his head. Silen said that we should be able to complete it in 10 days. Silen. Fleeka looked at Silen. Silen nodded. If we have all the materials, 10 days should be enough. Fleeka's eyes twitched again and again. He took another deep breath. He didn't know what to say about Silen. Silen's assembly skills were undeniable, and it was the most efficient assembly technique Fleeka had ever seen in his life. After thinking for a moment, Fleeka said, I will get the materials for you as soon as possible. Make a list of the materials you need, and all of them must be delivered to you through my hands. I will estimate the price of these materials according to the lowest price in the Empire, and I will ask you to forfeit the race if the total price exceeds the stipulated price. This was Fleeka's final concession. Both Silen and Naimi were aware of it, and they had no objections at all. I will provide you with the assembly space. During this time, you are not allowed to leave the place until the assembly is complete. Let me know if you have any additional requests. I don't have the time to keep an eye on you all the time, so be on your own. This is what I ask of you. Ah. Confinement? Can't we even have visitors from the outside? Naimi complained. No. Fleeka's attitude was very firm. The people he set up outside wouldn't bring these two kids anything illegal. Fine, we won't have time to wander around once the assembly is complete anyway. Naimi said. What about Silen? Fleeka looked at Silen. If Silen had any objections, he would never allow Silen to participate in the race. I'm fine with it. Silen didn't have any objections. Alright, I'll take you to the assembly space. The assembly space was Fleeka's personal After he cleaned up some of the junk inside, he temporarily gave it to Sillin and Naimi. The factory's lounge and workshop were separated, and there were some sports equipment and first aid equipment. All in all, it was a standard Fleeca factory. Fleeca accepted Sillin's list of materials and said, "From now on, you two will stay here until you've assembled the entire car. You're not allowed to leave until you're done." "Alright, we will definitely abide by your rules," Sillin and Fleeca promised. After Fleeca left, Sillin checked the tools inside the factory. They were all relatively advanced and practical, and they were all well equipped. At the very least, all the tools Sillin needed were here. "Are you done checking?" Naimi asked Sillin after he was done walking around the factory. "Yes, I have everything I need. It's very complete." "Of course, don't you know whose factory this is? Uncle Pang's territory isn't something an ordinary person can own. Moreover, no matter where the factory is, as long as it belongs to Uncle Pang, it's not something an ordinary person can enter. Including this time, I've only been inside the factory 3 times since I was young. The first 2 times were when I was still a kid." Fleeca took the list of materials Sillin had given him and quickly went to gather the materials. Even Fleeca didn't know what most of the materials Sillin had listed were for, but since Sillin had listed them out, Fleeca had to do his best to gather them. Many of the parts were not the most high-end models, but Fleeca could tell that these parts were the most suitable when they were assembled. Although he didn't know what some of the parts were for, it wasn't his place to ask Sillin right now. "Never mind, I'll wait until these 2 kids are done assembling the car. If they don't succeed, there's no need to ask." It didn't take long for Fleeca to deliver more than 90% of the materials Sillin had listed. The rest of the materials would take a day or 2, but Fleeca was able to get his hands on some of the rarer materials. Fleeca did a rough estimate of the materials and estimated that they would cost around 50 million at the lowest price. Of course, it would be a different story if Sillin wanted to add some of the materials. After Fleeca had delivered the materials into the factory, Sillin started assembling the car. The first thing he did was something Fleeca had never seen before. He didn't understand what Sillin was doing, and he didn't have the time to keep an eye on him. Naimi wasn't very good at assembling, and Sillin didn't need his help during the assembly. That was why Naimi moved a chair over and watched Sillin assemble the car even though he didn't understand a thing. He was responsible for running errands and handing over the tools Sillin asked for. But Naimi was enjoying himself because watching Sillin assemble the car was a very enjoyable process. Sillin's hands could always bring a person into a wonderful state where they could forget everything in the outside world and enter a state of emptiness. If someone asked Naimi how Sillin assembled the car, he would definitely answer blankly, "I don't know." It was because he couldn't recall the details of Sillin's assembly. He thought that the process was supposed to be like that, but when he tried to recall it, he realized that every detail was blurry. While Sillin was assembling the car, on the other side of the planet, at the 3rd place of the last, Winds of Freedom, racing competition. When Tobia drove the car back that day, she told him that she had checked it at a repair station, but she didn't take it to heart when she saw that the value of the coefficient never went below 9. Today, Tobia rested for the whole day. She was very tired both physically and mentally after a few days of test flying. Tobia's flying car was also undergoing routine maintenance. It was a rule of the racing team that a full overhaul had to be done every few days, even if the car's self-inspection number didn't go below 9. Tobia was sleeping soundly in the lounge when her brother suddenly nudged her awake. Tobia was very angry that her sleep was disturbed. She didn't even open her eyes as she skillfully grabbed a lunchbox on the table next to her and threw it at the person who disturbed her sleep. "Tobia, wake up, I have something to ask you." She ignored her. "Be a good girl, Tobia. I have something important to ask you." "What?" "You can't take away my normal rest time even if you're the current captain of the racing team." She still didn't open her eyes. It would be very difficult to sleep again if she did. "It's about your beloved flying car." Tobia's eyes shot open when she heard her brother mention her beloved flying car. "What happened to my car?" "Come here, put on your jacket first." After Tobia put on her jacket, her brother, who was also the current captain of the Spearhead racing team, quickly dragged Tobia to the repair shop. When Tobia arrived at the repair shop of the racing team's base, her navigator, Chio-Su, was also there. The other people in the repair shop were gathered around the back of her car, looking at something and discussing animatedly. "What's going on?" Tobia asked Chio-Su. Chio-Su shook her head. "I don't know the specifics. They seem to have found something wrong during the maintenance and asked me about the maintenance at the public repair point. I told them the truth, but they didn't believe me, so they called you over." When the person in charge of the repair shop saw Tobia, he asked her about the maintenance and even asked her about some specific details. It was just as Chio-Su had said. "What's wrong? Is there something wrong with my car? I knew that guy was messing with me. Just tell me if there's a problem, and I'll go find him." He was wearing a work uniform and a cap at the time, but I remember his voice. "I'm sure we can find him if we look one by one, not to mention that every repair point has surveillance records. If we can't find him, we can apply to check the surveillance records at the time." "I refuse to believe that we can't find him," Tobia said angrily. The repairman looked at Tobia with a strange look in his eyes. The person in charge coughed and interrupted Tobia's complaints. "Actually, contrary to what you think, the person who repaired your flying car did a great job. At the very least, you won't have to repair that part of your car for a while. But according to our estimates, it's very believable that he was able to find the reason why your flying car's self-detection coefficient was so low and fix everything in such a short time. If what you say is true, then it can only mean that you've run into an expert. The Sizer family really is full of talented people." Tobia frowned. "He's not as good as you say, is he? I saw him doing it quite casually." "That's a real expert," a repair worker beside her said excitedly. The person in charge nodded in agreement. He pointed at the surface parts below the outer shell and said, "We didn't dare to touch these parts because we were afraid that we wouldn't be able to restore them if we did. This kind of skill is beyond our reach. An expert could see the workmanship of an assembler even if it was just two simple parts being assembled. Right now, the parts that had been assembled on this flying car were almost perfect. Not even a machine could guarantee that it would be perfect, let alone a person." "Tobia, Chio-Su, take me to that person. I have some questions I'd like to ask him," the person in charge said. "You want to ask him? That guy looks like a brat." Tobia disagreed with the person in charge's words. "You don't understand. Even if my overall skills are higher than his, I'm still far behind him when it comes to assembly. I'm coming too. Wait for me too. My car has a small problem too. Let's let that person try it out." Besides the person in charge, the other drivers and repair workers were also very curious about the mysterious person. They really wanted to witness the person's repair process with their own eyes. However, when the group arrived, they discovered that the person in charge was already gone. Fleeka's subordinates wouldn't leak any information about Sillin either, so the group could only return empty-handed. On the 9th day after Sillin and Naimi entered the factory, a disc-shaped thing that looked similar to the one on the blueprints was floating inside the factory. Naimi waved at it. "Hey, Veg Fritter, welcome to this world." "Thank you." A smiley face appeared on the disc-shaped outer shell. Chapter 263. It wasn't that there weren't super AI flying cars in the world, but they were all custom-made and non-race ready. After all, the technical requirements, circuit design, and manufacturing process of a super AI flying car were much higher than other flying cars. It was why Fleeka didn't think much of the idea of adding super AI technology into the mix. Most of the time, over-reliance on superintelligence wasn't a good thing, as it would affect the driver and navigator's decision-making during a race. That was why more racing cars leaned towards defensive and computational intelligence, rather than superintelligence that was far above the two and on the same level as a high-end robot. Adding super AI into the mix would undoubtedly make a flying car more attractive, but it would also attract a lot of mockery at the same time. Everyone in the business knew what was at stake. The cost was high, and the impact was huge. The loss outweighed the gain. Of course, both Sillin and Naimi had their own considerations. Is it really going to work? Naimi circled around Vegfritter before asking Sillin, that plan is pretty risky, isn't it? Sillin sat down on the ground and stared at Vegfritter that was spinning around like a coin. He smiled and said, it's just an experiment, isn't it? I really want to see their expressions when we put on an amazing show. You'll know when the time comes. Naimi chuckled. In reality, the Sizer family thought that they knew Naimi very well, but not many of them really did. Fleeka wouldn't have been so surprised otherwise. Instead of driving Vegfritter out of the city in a hurry, Sillin had just finished work. Sillin was incredibly tired from the days of work, so he didn't bother to change out of his work clothes and rest on a pile of spare parts. That's right, there were still a bunch of spare parts left. Sillin was already prepared to try again if he failed to assemble some of the parts, but to his surprise, the assembly went very smoothly this time. Moreover, Sillin felt like he had never assembled a machine in such a concentrated manner before. Not even when he was at Mo Hang's workshop back in the day. By the time Sillin was done with the assembly, everything was set up, and everything was checked to make sure everything was in order. He realized that it had been 9 days. Naimi rubbed his hands and patted Vegfritter, who was rolling around excitedly because it had come to this world. He said, come, Vegfritter. Sing a song for your big brother. Vegfritter stopped flipping and asked in a baby voice, what do you want to hear? Naimi thought for a moment. I want to listen to the classic version of the Empire's national anthem. Sillin was resting with his eyes closed when he heard Naimi's words. He couldn't believe that he would like the classic version. Usually, only older people would like the classic version. Young people usually liked the popular version. Sillin fell into a deep sleep amidst this classical music that symbolized the beat of that distant era. He didn't sleep for long. The next day, Sillin woke up. His sleep this time was very short compared to the amount of time he slept after working for a long time. But the quality of his sleep was pretty good this time. At the very least, Sillin was full of energy by the time he woke up the next day. On the 10th day, Fleeka purposely put down his work and came to the factory. He had been standing in front of the door for more than 30 minutes already. He didn't turn on the surveillance system inside, so he didn't know what was going on inside. However, he couldn't bring himself to ask the two brats to open the door, so he pretended to instruct the workers in repairing the flying car in a workshop not far away from the factory. His usual gentleness was nowhere near enough to make the maintenance workers shiver in fear. Of course the people who were being instructed understood what Fleeka was trying to say. The only thought in their minds was, come on out already, you two little devils. This guy is giving us too much pressure. Just as Fleeka was suppressing the anxiety in his heart, the factory's door opened. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at the door almost the second it opened. Normally, Fleeka would have scolded them already. He didn't like it when someone suddenly stopped their work in the middle of a repair. But right now, Fleeka wasn't in the mood to pay attention to them at all. His eyes were staring straight at the disc-shaped flying car that was about 7 meters in diameter. A lot of people here knew that Sillin and Naimi had been working on a flying car for the past few days, but they didn't know what kind of flying car Sillin and Naimi were building. Now that they saw the giant disc, everyone except Fleeka thought the same thing, Vegfritter. Why is it Vegfritter? There was no doubt that Vegfritter was a very bad word in the flying car circle. It had always been mocked. But Naimi, the young master of the main family, was building a Vegfritter flying car. Wasn't this a disgrace to the Sizer family? It wasn't hard to imagine how Naimi's father and grandfather would react when they learned about this. His father would probably regret allowing Naimi to participate in the competition. Unlike everyone else, Fleeka was staring straight at the Vegfritter. He noticed that there were still a bunch of spare parts inside the workshop when the flying car flew out. They weren't broken parts, they really were in used parts. So this flying car didn't actually cost 50 million MB to build. The metallic veg fritter that everyone mocked nowadays floated steadily in the air. Naimi's smug voice rang from the external speakers. Veg fritter, say hello to everyone. Everyone's gazes were focused on veg fritter the moment Naimi finished speaking. A simple smiley face appeared on the bare chassis of the flying car. The sky blue flowing lines made people feel as if the smile was looking down from the sky. It was as warm as sunlight. Hello everyone. My name is Veg Fritter. I was born yesterday. Nice to meet you all. The people below sucked in a breath at the same time. They were all industry insiders, and they had been in this business for many years. The shortest among them was at least 5 if not 10 years. Naturally they knew what this voice represented. It was a super AI system. It wasn't a primary and secondary operating system like other flying cars. It was a super AI system. They could tell whether or not this machine was a super AI system and how well it was equipped with a super AI system just by listening to its voice. But this flying car that everyone called an obsolete historical relic, was actually equipped with a super AI system. Even if this super AI system wasn't too advanced, it wasn't low by any means. This was a racing car, so why would they install a super AI system on a racing car? Was it not worth it? Fleeka couldn't even describe his shock right now. He found it hard to believe. How on earth did Silen do this? Both the ring design and the super AI equipment were completed? He had to admit that Fleeka's occupational disease was acting up again. Right now, he wanted nothing more than to drag Silen over to study the super AI system. Right now, he felt like his heart was being scratched by a furry claw, but there was nothing he could do about it. It was because Naimi had flown away after saying, let's try out the flying car. Silen and Naimi didn't drive the flying car. They had already discussed the test route, and Veg Fritter would follow it until it reached its destination. Both Silen and Naimi wanted to see how Veg Fritter would react to the obstacles in its not-so-advanced configuration. The flying car first flew to the rainforest area. Birds occasionally flew into the air from the dense forest below, and the officially marked track was only a dozen or so meters away from the top of the forest. There were a lot of moving plants in this rainforest, and the thick vines would whip their prey down from the sky. Then, they would wrap the prey in the vines and stab them with their sharp thorns to absorb nutrients. Apart from the vines, the flying car would occasionally run into some big birds. These birds would ignore you when they were in a good mood, but when they were in a bad mood, they would attack anything that flew past them even if they had a full stomach. This was what people usually said when they saw you as an eyesore. Trees that could move, large birds, animals that could run on rocks, other predators that could fly, and so on. These were all obstacles for the flying cars passing through here. Due to the fact that the racetrack had been sealed off, there was an isolation net that was flashing with electricity. No birds or other animals were allowed to approach within a 50-meter radius. Then, it whipped them at the birds. Silen. What a violent scene it was. Along the way, bird feathers filled the sky, and the incessant bird cries spread far and wide in the rainforest. One had to admit that it was a pretty effective tactic. The birds and animals weren't stupid, so most of them stayed away from it. A long silence later, Silen said, "There's no chance to whip the birds while we're speeding up." Veg Fritter paused in the middle of whipping a bird. Thankfully, there weren't many birds that would try to cause trouble right now, and they were about to leave the rainforest. They weren't attacked during this short pause. You made another mistake, Silen said. It was obvious that Veg Fritter knew that it shouldn't have paused just now. All right, the race isn't official yet, is it? You're doing pretty well in a situation like this. Naimi said. It is, but I'll be taking over the driving rights during the race. You should record everything you learn during the race. There are a lot of important things that can only be learned during a race. Silen said the latter half of the sentence to Veg Fritter. They weren't planning to use their super AI throughout the race to begin with. It was just for a certain segment. All right. Vegfritter looked very expectant. After the flying car flew past the rainforest area, it flew past the muddy swamp area, the snowy glacier area, the vast desert area, and the winding mountain road area at the same speed. 3 flying cars were parked on top of a cliff in the middle of the mountain roads. The few of them were leaning against the flying car, laughing and chatting about the competition while holding a glass of wine in their hands. Suddenly, one of them spat out the wine in his mouth. Fuck. Vegfritter. Am I seeing things? Look at you, you can't even do something like this, fuck. It really is Vegfritter. I can't believe there's someone driving Vegfritter around these days. The man looked like he was having a hard time accepting the fact. Where did this come from? A museum? An exhibition hall? Vegfritter flew past the mountain in a whoosh. They didn't fly over the first part of the road, but they did so because they detected people nearby. Sitting inside the car, Naimi propped his chin on his hand as he stared at the people standing on the cliff on the monitor. He tapped the back of the seat lightly with his finger. Is Vegfritter shameful? Naimi really wanted to smack a brick in their faces when he saw the look on their faces. Flying cars weren't shameful. They shouldn't be shameful, and they shouldn't be burdened with this heavy word. They carried people through an era, and even if they were criticized for their flaws and imperfections later on, that didn't mean they couldn't be denied. They weren't failures. They were the brightest stars of their era, and the Crescent Moon, Sharp Blade, and other so-called improved flying cars wouldn't exist without them. When Naimi was very young and saw the round and lonely flying car parked in the largest and most complete flying car museum in the entire empire, Naimi suddenly felt as if he could feel the car's mournful wail. The other booths were surrounded by people, and the spectators were fighting with each other to comment and flatter the Vegfritter. Naimi suddenly felt that the Vegfritter, the professionals, and the so-called flying car enthusiasts had belittled as Vegfritter was waiting to be redeemed by the professionals and the so-called flying car enthusiasts in front of him. Compassion, understanding, and dignity were all basic human qualities, but these qualities weren't reflected in flying cars at all. Many people couldn't understand the Sizer family's feelings towards flying cars, and only thought that it was a way to make money for the Sizer family. But not everyone thought the same. At least Naimi didn't like flying cars for profit. The sudden surge of emotion he felt when he was young was too strong, and it had accompanied him for many years. That was why Naimi had suggested the name Vegfritter when it was time to name the new flying car. Sillin smiled. Sillin thought that Vegfritter was a really good name. A successful and glorious person didn't need to give his name a deep meaning, because as long as he succeeded, his name would naturally be covered with a shiny coat. Similarly, a successful flying car didn't need a name that was flashy and meaningful, as if it was afraid that people wouldn't know that it was going to be a glorious name. A successful flying car would naturally have a meaningful name. Naimi told Sillin that he wanted to send this abandoned circle back to the top, and accompany it to the top. He wanted to make people realize their mistakes, and remove that heavy word from its name. We'll win, Vegfritter. Of course, I think we'll win too. Vegfritter said affirmatively. Stop dreaming. Let's take care of the problem at hand first. Sillin cut off the conversation between man and car. What problem? Naimi asked in puzzlement. Did you bring food? Sillin looked at Naimi. Naimi. Fuck. Chapter 264. They were so excited that all they wanted to do was take Vegfritter out for a spin. They completely forgot about the time it would take to do so, and how they were going to fill their stomachs during that time. However, the good thing was that some small herbivores and some wild fruits could be found in the mountainous areas. Other than the quadrennial competition, there were not many people walking around the planet. Therefore, many resources were preserved in their original state, and the species were quite rich. Sillin and Naimi found a valley and stopped the car to look for food. There was a simple multi-stage heating device on the car that could cook the food. They didn't bring any condiments, so they could only find some spices and condiments from the plants around them that would stimulate the taste buds and make the food easier to swallow. There were rules against starting fires in places with abundant plants. Not only that, it didn't matter if you were using a heating device, a microwave device, a laser device, or any other kind of heating device to create a large area of fire. If you were caught doing so, you would be punished or even disqualified from the tournament. Sillin and Naimi didn't plan to make it too complicated. All they needed to do was eat some food and replenish their energy. Someone's coming. 3 flying cars, 7 people. Vegfritter suddenly said. A projection appeared on its screen and showed them the distance between the 3 flying cars. They must have noticed us too. They're obviously flying towards us. Naimi said while stuffing meat into his mouth. Sillin hadn't asked Vegfritter to turn invisible, so it wasn't surprising that they were discovered. The 3 flying cars didn't have the logo of a racing team that Sillin knew of. They looked more like private flying cars, and their appearance was ostentatious with some wavy peaks. They looked mighty, but they weren't suitable for racing. They were custom-made flying cars, and Sillin could tell that they were built not long ago. They were probably the new cars of some noble scion. As the 3 flying cars got closer and closer, an arrogant voice rang out from the speaker on the black flying car in the lead. Ha, am I seeing things? The young master of the Sizer family is driving an antique Vegfritter. Naimi felt nauseous the moment he heard the voice, and spat out the meat in his mouth. Very considerately, Vegfritter passed a fingernail-sized speaker to Naimi to amplify its voice. Tui. Do you think driving a flashy car like this will improve your taste? A layman who doesn't even know where the energy coupling device is, even if he's driving the best flying car in the entire empire, he's still just a layman. A guy who runs like a tortoise doesn't have the right to criticize me. The 3 flying cars stopped about 20 centimeters from the ground, and the people inside jumped down. They were very typical aristocratic children, afraid that others wouldn't know that they were aristocrats. Their expressions were habitually arrogant and disdainful. Briles, did you twist your neck? Why are you raising your chin so high? Naimi snapped at the leader of the group. Brielle still looked down his nose at Naimi, and it made Sillin think that he was pride of the League of Stars. Brielle swept a glance at Sillin, and after confirming that he didn't recognize him, he stopped paying attention to him. Brielle's had an impression of every upper-class descendant of his generation in the Empire, but Sillin wasn't on his list. Therefore, Brielle's treated Sillin as one of the flatterers behind him. His gaze moved back to Vegfritter, and Brielle snorted. You've got good taste, aren't you? I can't believe you took out such an antique and paraded it through the streets. I'd be ashamed if I were a member of the Sizer family. The Sizer family would be ashamed if they had someone like you. Naimi sat down next to Vegfritter and stared back at Brielle's with the same disdain. You? Isn't the Sizer family good at flying cars? Why didn't I see you participating in the Winds of Freedom? What's so great about competing in a small race? Who said I didn't participate in the Winds of Freedom? Which eye of yours saw that? You participated? This time? Brielle's was surprised, but he was just saying it to lower Naimi's morale. It was rare for someone of their status to participate in a large-scale, dangerous race like this without fear. The Sizer family was actually willing to let Naimi participate. Weren't they afraid that he wouldn't be able to return? Put away your pettiness, is there anyone in the world who's afraid of death like you? TSK. What's with your eyes? You're a coward yourself, but don't think of everyone else as cowards. Brielle's wasn't angry at Naimi's mockery. Instead, he asked, your father actually agreed? Of course. Naimi said proudly. Brielle's rubbed his chin and rolled his eyes. Then, he pointed at Vegfritter and asked, you want to use it? Naimi patted Vegfritter and said, exactly. Ha 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 ha, Brielle's and the people behind him were laughing so hard that they could barely breathe. Sillin didn't react to their unbridled mockery at all. The greatest counterattack was to speak with facts, and when that happened, these bastards would naturally realize just how ridiculously wrong they were. A moment of silence later, Brielle said, "Ha, Naimi, why don't we make a bet?" "What kind of bet?" Naimi asked. 50 million MB. Aren't you participating in this race? This money is yours if you can get into the top 5. TCH, do you think I'm short of 50 million? Naimi was stubborn. He didn't have that much pocket money, and this was enough to build another veg fritter. That being said, it was a lie to say that he wasn't tempted. With this 50 million, he could upgrade veg fritter again. He would replace many of its components with better ones and upgrade it from top to bottom. Are you going to bet or not? Bet. You think I'm afraid of you? He didn't need to prove anything. They might look like spoiled brats, but they had their own pride and dignity. There was no way they would renege on a verbal bet like this. Brielle's was the first to laugh when he saw Naimi's veg fritter. Naimi raised an eyebrow and was about to say something when veg fritter suddenly said, "Another flying car is coming. It'll be here in 15 seconds. Brielle's laughter came to an abrupt halt. The people behind him didn't quite understand what was going on, but they stopped laughing as well. Brielle's narrowed his eyes in disbelief. He was even more surprised than when he saw the antique veg fritter. They actually installed a super AI system on a racing car. Was Naimi an idiot? Was he insane? If that was the case, then Naimi was going to lose for sure. Brielle's was just about to say something when the flying car veg fritter was talking about was already approaching them. It took exactly 15 seconds for it to reach them. The flying car wasn't as flashy as Brielle's and the others, but it was also very novel. It looked like a warblade, one with a blood groove. Of course, it wasn't as long as a warblade, but the first impression people would have upon seeing it was that it was a fierce warblade, a warblade with hidden killing intent that pressed forward with an indomitable will. The flying car's equipment was pretty good, and almost all of them were the military's top equipment. Sillin didn't need to disassemble it, and with his experience in assembling a flying car, he only needed to glance at a flying car, listen to the sound it made, and feel the friction when it cut through the air to learn some basic information. Military equipment? Who was the owner of the car? And it was obviously coming for them. Brielle's and Naimi didn't say a word. Although they weren't as professional as Sillin and didn't know as much as he did, the two children who used to travel among the upper nobles had an instinctive feeling that the people inside the flying car weren't simple. The flying car finally landed, and the door opened like a sword being unsheathed. However, the person who jumped out of the car looked a little out of place. The people behind Brielle's wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare act too carelessly before Brielle's made his stance clear. It was a child who had jumped down from the flying car with an absolutely powerful aura. Sillin even recognized him. It was Taita. Behind Taita was a familiar old servant and 3 bodyguards. Brielle's and Naimi's eyes twitched when they saw Taita. Why is this troublesome little bean here? Not long ago, one of the military giants, the Yurong family, had announced a piece of news. Of course, the news was only spread among the upper nobles, and the lower nobles didn't know about it. That was how everyone learned about Yurong Taita. He was the Yurong family's old patriarch's youngest son. Yes, his son. As the saying goes, an old clam gives birth to a pearl. Old Patriarch Yurong was very strict with his sons and daughters, but his youngest son was an exception. Right now, the entire upper nobles of the empire knew that there were 2 brats they didn't dare to provoke other than the people of the monarch and the 3 kings. One was Yurong Taita, and the other was Gleason Dodge. Anyone who dared to touch them would be met with great misfortune. That was why Brielle's was filled with regret when Taita showed up. Why did he have to run into such a troublesome person when he came here to argue with Naimi? In terms of seniority, Taita was 1 generation older than all of them. Taita didn't look at anyone else and walked straight towards Sillin. "Sillin, why didn't you greet me when you saw me?" That was what he said, but everyone present could see that Taita had no intention of blaming Sillin at all. He was obviously happy to see a familiar face as he ran up to Silen. "Long time no see. Don't you have classes or missions?" Silen asked. "I just finished a mission my mentor gave me, and he was so happy that he gave me a long vacation so that I can come watch the flying car race. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. I just arrived today, and I didn't expect to run into you." "It's nice to have a familiar face," Taita said happily. Both Brielles and Naimi thought at the same time, "Your mentor is giving you a backdoor. There's no way those old foxes who don't look like role models can't tell that you can't control your emotions. Who dares to make you unhappy?" "Hey, what were you guys talking about just now?" Taita asked curiously. Silen looked at Brielles and Naimi. Brielles opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. The person behind him thought that Brielles was too lazy to speak, and was about to answer for Brielles when Brielles noticed and elbowed him in the stomach. His face contorted in pain and he swallowed the words he was about to say. When the others saw this, how could they not understand what Brielles meant? They all obediently shut their mouths. Taita then looked at Naimi. Naimi smiled stiffly. He really didn't know how to deal with this troublesome person. "We just made a bet," Naimi said. "What bet?" After listening to Naimi's explanation, Taita looked at Silen. "You're in the same team as him?" Silen nodded, "Yes." "Ha, alright then, I'll participate as well. I bet that you'll win." Brielle's smile was a little stiff. "Fuck, what the hell is a child messing around with an adult's business? If Naimi and Naimi really lose, you'll definitely pull a long face and we'll be the unlucky ones. Although it's just a scolding from my parents, it's still an undeserved calamity." Brielles didn't want to stay here even a second longer, so he made up an excuse and ran as fast as he could with his lackeys. Chapter 265. Naimi didn't relax much after Brielles left. He watched strangely as Silen and Taita chatted. He really didn't expect Silen to be acquainted with Taita. Old Master Yurong's youngest, precious son was even younger than his grandson. If the Yurong family hadn't spread the news a while ago, most people wouldn't even know of his existence. Even if they did, they would have only heard of his name and never seen his face. Speaking of which, Old Master Yurong was very happy when Taita was recruited by AF1's junior class. It was the first time he publicized his youngest son's information to the upper nobility circle. At the same time, he also told everyone that no one should offend my precious son, or this old man would kill or cripple them even if it meant risking his life. Everyone in the upper nobility circle knew that Old Master Yurong wasn't lying. He was serious, so they immediately told their children not to provoke Taita. Otherwise, the old man would go crazy. However, Taita was the most spoiled child of the Yurong family at his age, and no one knew when to stop. Those who tried to get close to Taita were afraid that they would backfire and get themselves in trouble, so they stayed away from him. That was why Taita didn't have many people he was familiar with until now. When Silen was about to leave, Taita expressed that he wanted to go with him. He was here for a vacation anyway, so he could do whatever he wanted. That day, a lot of people saw the following scene: an antique vegfritter with an impressive flying car next to it. Taita didn't know anything about flying cars, so he wasn't as surprised by vegfritter's appearance as the others were. He was just curious that the flying car could talk like a robot. The flying car his father had gifted him was also equipped with a superintelligence system, but didn't his brothers say that racing cars wouldn't be equipped with such a system? Taita was too young to drive these two flying cars, so Old Master Yurong specifically assigned him a driver whose driving skills were in no way inferior to the racers participating in the Winds of Freedom. After a test flight, Silen and the others landed at a large rest area. There were many teams parked here, and each team had a sub-base here so that their own flying cars could receive the best repairs. Moreover, they would not believe that it was not their own people. Cheating was a common occurrence in every tournament, so they had to be on high alert. Other than their own repairmen, only the Sizer family's public repair points could win their trust. In this large rest area, the various teams raised their flags high, including the traditionally strong Spearhead Team, Arrow Team, Lightning Team, etc. Spearhead and Lightning were both teams that had started out as private teams. However, with the development of the teams and the need for funds, the teams later received the support of some nobles and financial groups. With the support of strong funds, the development of the teams became better and better. They also trained some excellent racers for the nobles who invested in them. There were a lot of teams like them. Flying cars cost a lot of money, especially for large events like this. There was no way a team could survive without a strong background. As for the Arrow Team, it was a subordinate team of an aircraft manufacturing company. Therefore, most of their flying cars were equipped with the standard equipment of an aircraft. They were thought to be the team closest to an aircraft, and their subsidiary company had worked with the Sizer family on a couple of whirlwind projects. Many people were jealous of them. Sillin and Naimi didn't have a caravan with them, so they were probably on the Sizer family's side. Therefore, Sillin and Naimi headed straight for the Sizer family's public repair point. Taita and Sillin got off the car, and the old servant followed closely behind them. They were guests, and this was the Sizer family's territory. Therefore, Naimin had to show his hospitality as a young master, so he invited Taita and the others to rest at the repair point. Sillin and the others' Vegfritter attracted almost everyone's attention. There were plenty of people who ridiculed them and said all kinds of nasty things. Moreover, Vegfritter was heading to the public repair point, so people looked down on it even more. An antique flying car that didn't even have a fleet and could only enter a public repair point was really hard to convince. But when they saw that the people at the public repair point were acting respectfully towards the racers who came out from the other side, some of them shut their mouths. It didn't take long before a couple of people in charge of the repair point personally came out with friendly smiles on their faces. They led the newcomers into the house. "Hey, who are those people?" "I don't know, but they look like people of status." "People of status eat veg fritters? Maybe that's what they like." Of course, there were some people who recognized Naimin. Naimin and Sillin hadn't put on their helmets since they came out of the repair point, so there were some people who recognized the young master of the Sizer family. That was why they told their people to keep their mouths shut in case they got into trouble. After all, this was the Sizer family's territory. Even if they did something shameful, it wasn't something that anyone could criticize. There weren't many nobles like Naimin and Brielle's here, so no one recognized Taita. The children of the great nobles had all gone off to have fun together, and Zhen Xingming and the others were nowhere to be found. Sillin didn't care about them either, so it wasn't his place to worry about them. Naimin had already told his family about Taita, so the people who came out to greet him just now were all people with real power in every repair point on the planet. They also showed how much they valued Taita. Every business family would be happy to establish a good relationship with the military, and the Sizer family didn't have a strong relationship with the military. That was why the flying car race hadn't been able to develop into a military car race until now. At first, the Sizer family's rule was that they couldn't afford to offend Taita even if they didn't want to befriend him. But after Naimin's report, many people in the Sizer family lost their cool. This was an opportunity, a rare opportunity. The old Yurong general wouldn't express anything just because of his sons, but no one could say for sure what his youngest son would do. How could he let such a good opportunity slip by? That was why the discontent caused by Naimin and Sillin's Vegfritter had subsided a lot. After resting for a while, Sillin and Naimin prepared to return to Flika's place. Taita also indicated that he wanted to follow them. The repair shop's people who were supposed to inspect Vegfritter were having a hard time doing so, and even after Sillin and Naimin had come out, they still hadn't started repairing it. This Vegfritter was completely different from the antiques they knew of, and its super AI system didn't allow the repair workers to touch it. "Alright, we'll take care of this car ourselves. You don't need to worry about it," Naimin said and jumped into the car that opened up on its own. Sillin drove the flying car slowly into the air. He opened the window and said a few words to the people on the ground while waiting for Taita and the others to take off. It was at this moment a flying car flew past them. The car wasn't fast, but it was less than 5 meters away from Scylla and the others. Scylla turned around and looked at the silver flying car that didn't stand out among the sea of flying cars. His eyes flashed with puzzlement. "What, do you know it?" Nymin pointed at the flying car that had flown into the distance with his chin. Scylla shook his head and didn't say anything. The puzzlement in his eyes also disappeared. However, he was muttering to himself, could it be her? Why is she here? What happened? Even if he couldn't see the person inside the silver flying car, Scylla could guess who it was from the faint voice he heard when the car brushed past him. The flying car wasn't soundproof, and Scylla felt like he was being watched by 3 pairs of eyes the moment it brushed past him. There were 3 people inside the flying car, and one of them was Sula, the woman who served the Gen family and whom Scylla had seen before. Sula wasn't with Gen Xingyao this time, but the other 2 people were probably from the Gen family as well. The 3 of them definitely weren't just here to watch the tournament. Could it be that they were here to protect someone from the Gen family? Gen Xingming's bodyguards had been assigned since a long time ago, and according to Gen Xingming, Gen Xingyao and Gen Xingchen wouldn't be here. What on earth were they here for? Scylla was very puzzled. Moreover, Sula's actions meant that she was secretly reminding Scylla of something. "Let's go." Taita leaned against the window of the flying car and said to Scylla. "All right." The window closed, and the flying cars accelerated. The 2 flying cars quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. However, there was a group of people talking about Scylla at this rest stop, and they weren't talking about Vegfritter but Scylla. "Are you sure?" The current captain of Spearhead asked his sister. Tobia nodded, "I'm 80% sure. Their backs are very similar." "I think so too." Although we couldn't see his face because he was wearing a work cap, and we were in a hurry, we didn't pay too much attention to him. Most of our attention was focused on the flying car, and we didn't hear anything from the other side. However, the figure is almost the same. His gait, his habitual rhythm, and the distance between each step are very similar, Chiu Su added. Then it should be him. Danny trusted Chiu Su's judgment. If Chiu Su said so, then it must be him. Scylla didn't know that the team members at the rest stop were speculating about him. Right now, he was mainly thinking about what Sula was up to. Sula probably didn't expect Scylla to notice her. Was it just a test? After returning to Flika's place, Scylla went back to his room and contacted Huimao first. Recently, Scylla had been wondering why the cat hadn't contacted him yet. Logically speaking, the cat wouldn't have waited this long. Even if it was managing its fish pond, it wouldn't have lasted this long. That fellow's patience was fine when it was hunting, but if it was just raising fish, it definitely wouldn't have lasted this long. Scylla wasn't worried about Huimao's safety with Genya around. After all, they were at the Gen family's base, and the cat was very good at networking. Something must have attracted Huimao's attention. It was Genya who answered the call. Judging from his complexion, he looked like he was recovering well. After a brief chat, Scylla asked about Huimao. Genya smiled and said, "I was going to give you a surprise when you came back, but since you asked, I'll show you." Genya took the communicator and went to a place so that Scylla could see the situation through the projection. The fish pond had grown a little bigger, and the lotus flowers that were supposed to be sturdier were nowhere to be seen. Huimao was crouching next to the fish pond with a plate beside him. Every now and then, Huimao would grab a piece of meat with its paw and throw it into the pond. Every time a piece of meat was thrown into the pond, a creature would crawl out of the pond and catch it. After eating the meat, the creature would stand up and swim upside down or in circles, wagging its tail and howling like a seal. At first, Scylla thought that the creature was supposed to sound like a seal, but the second time Huimao threw a piece of meat at it, the creature squeaked like a cicada. The third bark. The fourth lion roar. Scylla stared blankly at the projection on the communicator. Was he training a pet? Was Wheeze's pet? Silen didn't know that there was a rumor going around in the Gen family recently. In the beginning, when someone visited Genya, they saw a dark blue reptile with its paws tucked against the ground next to the newly built fish pond. A Huimao that was several times smaller than it was slapping its paw on its head. The second person who visited Genya saw a dark blue reptile with its paws tucked against the ground next to the newly built fish pond. A Huimao that was several times smaller than it was slapping its paw on its head. The third person who visited Genya saw a dark blue reptile with its paws tucked against the ground next to the fish pond. A Huimao that was several times smaller than it was slapping its paw on its head. See that? Genya pointed in that direction. Whis has been training its pet. Silen thinks for a moment, then asked, it came out of that egg. Almost all of the sea beast eggs from that planet with many sea beasts had become Huimao's food, like snacks. However, the egg that Huimao said was hard to digest had been treated as a toy by Huimao. Silen didn't expect the egg to hatch into a sea beast in such a short amount of time. Noticing the anomaly, Huimao found Genya's communicator. Wheeze, Silen saw it. Genya smiled as he walked over and handed the communicator to Huimao. Huimao's ears twitched. He seemed unhappy that Silen found out about this so soon. Silen, what do you think? That's my new pet. It can be used as food when necessary. Huimao said proudly. When Huimao said this, the creature in the fish pond visibly shivered. What's its name? Silen asked. At first I wanted to call it Eggy because it came out of an egg. But second Grandpa said that this name wasn't very good, and he wanted to give it a fierce name. So after thinking for 2 days and looking up countless materials, I finally decided on one. Silen had a bad feeling about this, so he temporarily ignored the fact that Huimao called him second Grandpa. What's its name? Little 3. Silen. Whis was even explaining proudly to Silen while flexing its claws, look, you and I are the world's number 1 and number 2, so it's free to give up number 3 to it. Silen put a hand to his forehead. Change it. Huimao's whiskers trembled when his idea was rejected. He was about to say something when Silen said, what about Shuechyo, Sigma, Cheto, and Chifeng? Huimao's ears pulled back and didn't say anything. This was how it behaved every time it was weak. In Huimao's new world, only the people and things it was familiar with were ranked. Everything else was ignored. Alright, think again. Tell me when you've thought of something. Humph. Huimao pressed the end button, turned around and walked toward the fish pond. None of the previous names work. I'll think of another one. The creature in the fish pond wagged its tail happily. Finally, it didn't have to call out such an awful name. Awoo, shut up, meow. Don't think I don't know you're laughing at me. Genya shook his head, walked to the rocking chair beside the tree, and closed his eyes to rest again. Silen's smile slowly disappeared after he ended the call with Huimao. Genya didn't know that Silen was communicating with Whis using a machine language that wasn't sound waves at the same time. Silen didn't want Genya to know either. Right now, Genya needed to focus on his recovery. Although Huimao was busy training his new pet, he didn't forget to gather information. From Whis's information, Silen learned that the Liao dynasty had sent some people to Whirlwind in secret. They had sent some people to assist the Sizer family in managing the Sizer family's territory. They had received a secret report that Black Viper was active on this planet. If Black Viper's people were active on this planet, their target might be Silen. Genya couldn't be sure, but just in case, Gen Liao had secretly sent some people over. No wonder Silen had noticed that he was being watched a few times. It looked like they were all sent by Gen Liao. As for Black Viper's people, Silen hadn't seen them yet. After that incident, the RAS had developed a new type of detector. If it was the same robot, it would definitely be able to detect Black Viper's presence. The Sizer family had multiple checks and scans on everyone who entered this planet, but Black Viper's ability to surprise people was uncanny. Silen told Huimao to keep investigating and inform Silen when he was done. As for naming Huimao's new pet, it was a good excuse and cover. In the days leading up to the race, Sillin and Naimi went out on their sports car. Sometimes, they would let Vegfritter drive on autopilot when it got tired. Most of the time, it was Sillin who did the driving while they analyzed the terrain and the weather. More and more people were arriving on this planet. Hui Mao had contacted Sillin, but he didn't get much information. Zhen Liao probably didn't know much about this planet either. Hui Mao wanted to come over, but Sillin might not make it in time even if he did. Not only that, it would arouse a lot of people's suspicions. Fortunately, he left Hui Mao in the courtyard to train Zhenya's pet. Soon, the day of the race arrived to everyone's expectations. According to Sillin and Naimi's plan, Naimi had placed a rainbow-colored light in Sillin's room and set it to change colors randomly. The first color Sillin saw when he woke up on the day he woke up would be the track they had chosen for the first circuit. On the day of the race, when Sillin woke up and looked at the rainbow-colored light, it was red. Naimi was very happy. It was a good start. Amen, this is a good sign. I have a feeling that we'll get a good placing in the first stage. The top 3 are right in front of us. Naimi said confidently. Aren't you a little too confident? There have been cases in the past where the red track is the longest. Fleeka walked over to them. He thought that the 2 boys would be nervous, and that he could help ease their nerves. He didn't expect Naimi's overconfidence to be the first thing he heard. Uncle Fatty, you're my real uncle. How can you talk like that? No matter what, you 2 look like you're in a good state of mind. Keep it up, and there's something I need to say again, safety first. Sillin and Naimi added in unison before Fleeka could finish. It's good that you know that. You're just treating this race as a rare experience. There's no need to risk your lives like those people. Your lives are much more important than theirs. Alright, Uncle Fatty, we know that. Didn't you check Vegfritter's safety system? Don't you have any confidence at all? It has nothing to do with confidence. Let's go, let's go. Get ready to make a grand entrance. I'm going to blind all the spectators. Naimi didn't want to listen to Fleeka's nagging any longer, so he called Sillin and drove straight to the venue. The stages of the competition were spread across the entire planet, starting from the rainbow of beginnings in the first stage, followed by the rainforest, muddy swamps, glaciers and snowy lands, endless deserts, vast oceans, and winding mountain roads. There were 7 stages in total. Each stage had a viewing point, so the audience could watch the competition from any of the stage's viewing points. The racetrack wasn't a straight line, and there were a lot of twists and turns. It would take a lot of time even if the racer was extremely fast. Therefore, the spectators could continue watching the other stages as long as time permitted. Of course, the Sizer family had partnered with several major media outlets to broadcast the race live. Those who couldn't watch the race in person could watch it through a special channel. Of course, the further away they were from the planet, the less they knew about the race. The first stage was without a doubt the most spectators, and it was also the most expensive. Every participating car and racer would be introduced briefly at the beginning, and the veteran teams were the ones that attracted the most attention. The stands would erupt with excitement when their cars entered the arena. The triangular cone flying car Sillin had seen before was one of the participating cars, but it wasn't Spearhead Seed car. Sillin and Naimi were the last ones to enter the arena, and they were the last ones to enter the arena anyway. The last car to enter the arena caused the entire arena to fall silent after waves of crazed laughter from the spectators. No one knew who let out the first laugh, but everyone else followed suit. Sillin and Naimi had heard those words many times recently, so they were immune to it. They calmly drove into the arena. Before the organizer could introduce the driver and navigator of the flying car, someone shouted through a megaphone, "Do your best, Sillin, Naimi, Vegfritter." It was Taita, the kid. The spectators laughed even harder when they heard Taita's childish roar. There were even people who laughed at Taita, but a gun barrel appeared out of nowhere and pressed against his head in the next moment. That was why everyone knew that there was a kid who couldn't be messed with sitting here before the race began. Taita aside, Zhen Xingming and the others had also shouted out loud. The young men and women who were with them were all astonished by what they saw. The descendants of the three kings actually knew someone who drove an antique flying car. Zhen Xingming pointed at Silan and said, "That's my bro." In other words, you're not allowed to laugh at him no matter what car he's driving. Since the day before the race began, Silan had told Naimi to prepare himself mentally and prepare more antihypertensive drugs. Antihypertensive drugs were one of the permissible drugs. After verifying the identity of the racers and their belongings, the racers got ready and drove their flying cars to the track of their choice. The rainbow track at the start was made up of 7 cylindrical tracks made of special materials. Each track was a different color, and they couldn't be seen from one another. The 7 tracks could only be distinguished by color at the starting point. After a certain distance, all 7 tracks became the same color and intertwined with each other. Some of them looked like knots on a rope from afar. It was a dazzling sight to behold, and the further the race went, the harder it became to tell which track was the one chosen by their team. The media would follow every track and report, and it was only half a minute after the race began that everyone would know the total length and difficulty of their chosen track. Some people said that the first track was unfair, but the world was unfair in the first place. It was an undeniable fact that a race was full of opportunities, and the Sizer family had put this element of opportunity into the race so that everyone could experience it. Of course, bets would be made during the race. It didn't matter if it was the audience at the venue or the spectators on other planets. Right now, everyone hoped that the flying car they supported would choose a shorter track. Silan drove his flying car to the entrance of the red track. There were 3 other flying cars who had chosen the red track just like him, and none of them were from the top 3 of the last Grand Prix. It looked like there weren't many flying cars who chose the red track this time. Most of them were at the entrance of the purple track. There were 12 flying cars there. After every racer sent a "ready" signal to the race manager, the manager announced the start of the race. The 10-second countdown. During these 10 seconds, the audience was very quiet and held their breaths as they waited for the moment. Naimi shot a glance at Silan. Silan's eyes were closed, one hand on the steering wheel, and the other on the control panel. He was very quiet, and his breathing was very even. He didn't look like he was in a match at all, but more like he was asleep. Naimi could feel his own nervousness and excitement. This was the first big race he had ever participated in, and the most important race of his life. Naimi's breathing calmed down a lot when Silan's state of mind was done. When the countdown ended and the horn sounded, the entire stadium erupted into an uproar. An earth-shattering roar stirred up the first wave of emotion since the start of the race. When the horn sounded, Silan's flying car started moving. However, unlike the other 3 flying cars, he didn't accelerate for a short period of time at the start of the race. The audience watched the video on the big screen and their own viewing devices. The situation on the red track was very interesting. The other 3 flying cars were about the same, but Vegfritter was way behind. I told you that an antique car like this isn't suitable for the race. That's why I wisely didn't bet on it. I bet on Spearhead instead. I bet on Arrow. I bet on Lightning Racing's champion. Silan didn't know what the people outside were talking about them, but he didn't care. Right now, all he cared about was flying according to the plan he had come up with. There weren't a lot of curves and spirals in the first half of the rainbow track, and even if there were, they were easy and suitable for acceleration. However, Silan didn't accelerate to the max immediately. "Silan, can you increase the gear?" Naimi said anxiously when he saw that he was falling behind. "There's no rush," Silan said indifferently. "But this is a high-speed racetrack. You'll be at a disadvantage if you keep going at this speed." "Don't worry." The flying car continued to accelerate at the same speed. Just as Naimi was about to say something again, Silan said, "Didn't I tell you to increase your body's tension in the early stages of the race? Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for you later on." Naimi recalled what Silan said before the race, but he didn't take it to heart at the time. He never thought that he needed that much time to prepare. He grew up driving a flying car. Half a minute later, Fleeka thought to himself when he saw the results of the racetrack, "It's over." The red track was the longest, and it had more curves, spirals, and junctions than the other tracks. But Silen and the others had chosen this one. Zhen Xingming was so depressed that he wasn't even as excited as he was when he saw the flying car. Taito wasn't depressed though. He thought that this was just the first racetrack, and even if he didn't get a good result in the first race, he still had 6 more chances to run. It was a test of skill, and he shouldn't think that he couldn't run just because he tripped while learning to run. Just when everyone thought that the antique Vegfritter was hopeless, and Naimi's hands went cold after learning about the racetrack, Vegfritter had already accelerated to a speed that was universally acknowledged to be dangerous in corners, and it didn't look like it was slowing down at all. When Naimi came back to his senses, he almost jumped up when he saw the speed displayed on the display. "We're almost at the spirals, we can't go at this speed." "It's fine." Silen looked as calm as ever, but his hands hadn't slowed down in the slightest. "This won't do. It's easy to get into an accident if we keep accelerating. Even if we chose the most difficult track, we still have a chance later on. This is just the beginning." This time, Naimi was the one comforting Silen. He thought that Silen must have reacted this way because he knew the result. The spirals weren't like the flat left-right curves or the interlocking hairpin curves. They were shaped like a spiral, and each spiral was different. A big spiral was connected to a smaller spiral, and then another, and then another. Finally, there was a 270-degree angle of rotation. There was no fixed angle, and sometimes it looked like a knot had been tied in the middle of a racetrack. There was also a circuitous flight, and almost every driver had to adjust their flight according to the situation on the track ahead of them. A curve like this couldn't be solved with simple drifting, so most people would slow down instead of flying at full speed like they did on the rainbow track. Naimi was still trying to persuade Silen to slow down, but when he turned around, he discovered that he couldn't see the track anymore. All he could see was a curve. It had to be a curve, wasn't it? Was it a spiral just now? Or did it look like 2? I can't be sure. For the first time, Naimi doubted his own judgment. He himself had flown through countless spirals, but he couldn't make a clear judgment just now. When he glanced at the speed displayed on the display, Naimi felt his legs start to tremble uncontrollably. The commentator explained the top few flying cars. Arrow's flying car was in the lead. It was a flying car that looked like a sailfish. Every time it made a turn, its body would bend to a certain angle, allowing it to make turns at high speed. The driver's control was also impeccable. Not far behind Arrow's seed was Spearhead's flying blade and Lightning's crescent moon. The 3 cars had lifted everyone's spirits. The audience felt like they were experiencing the perfect combination of high speed and weightlessness, and their adrenaline levels were skyrocketing. Most of the people who came here were racing enthusiasts, and they had experienced spirals before. They could feel the intense weightlessness and the continuous psychological drop that came with the speed. Without a certain level of mental endurance, it was very likely that they would faint from the extreme speed and the intense psychological impact. Those who couldn't handle it were already finding it hard to breathe. Just as the commentator was about to use his emotional commentary to motivate the audience, his voice suddenly cut off. At some point, the Vegfritter that everyone had forgotten about had caught up to the 3 flying cars in front of it, and it was even closing the gap between them. It's the Vegfritter we've forgotten too early. It's here. It's catching up. Oh, I can't believe it. According to the latest information I received, it's still accelerating. What's wrong with it? What's going on? Since Silen's flying car was catching up to them, the 3 cars at the front had picked up speed one after another. None of them were seated cars, so there was a clear gap between them and the other tracks. In other words, they were the most backward overall in the red track. Even so, the commentator couldn't help but look at Vegfritter in a new light based on the information he just received. Naimi stared at the skyrocketing car from the navigator's seat. He didn't dare look at the track in front of him because he was afraid that he would faint. He could tell whether the car was passing through a small angle curve, a spiral curve, or a node based on how it was flying, but he couldn't tell how many spirals it was passing through. It was exactly because he knew how difficult the track was that he was shaking uncontrollably at this speed. They're going to die, they're really going to die. However, Naimi slowly came back to his senses as the car passed through a spiral curve and a node. Naimi had mocked Brielles for being afraid of death, but everyone was afraid of death. It was just that under certain special circumstances, other emotions would overwhelm the fear of death. People called it the deepest emotion. Right now, Naimi was experiencing this intense feeling from the fear of death to the deepest emotion occupying his entire brain. For the first time, the media noticed that their surveillance cameras couldn't keep up with the flying car's original speed. All the tracking devices on the racetrack used the same tracking speed, but on this flying car, the original tracking speed had been left behind. The person responsible for tracking the red track picked up his communicator and asked his superior to adjust the speed of the surveillance cameras. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to catch the flying car. Chapter 266. The person in charge of tracking the red racetrack reported to his superiors and sent over the video he just captured. It didn't take long before he was notified that they didn't need to adjust the speed of the cameras on this racetrack. They sent another person to track the veg fritter. At the same time, the League of Stars media and the Sizer family's research team were tracking all the flying cars in the race. Of course, they noticed Sillin and the others as well. Naimi was participating in the race. Even though veg fritter's performance wasn't great at the beginning, they still sent someone to track it. It wasn't because they were hoping that veg fritter would perform well, but because they wanted to be the first to react if something happened to it. It looks like Naimi isn't as good as we thought he was, one of the organizers said. Another person agreed, that's true. This is their true strength, isn't it? It's not that no one came up with a circular design back in the day, it's just that no one was able to utilize the advantages of that design to their fullest potential. That's why veg fritter was eliminated back then, but it's obvious that the racer in it can handle the circular design. If I recall correctly, the circular design is a combination of electromagnetic effects and manual control. It's so that a flying car can turn faster using its external rotation. But that was always thought to be just theory. I didn't think that I'd see it in action one day. The control of the spiral and firing angle is practically perfect. Someone pointed at the clearly slowed down video on the screen and said, if I remember correctly, there was a veg fritter that used scaly propulsion in its design back then, right? The others fell silent when they heard the word scaly propulsion. A dozen or so seconds later, someone said, if the scaly propulsion is really based on the original design, then it's only a theory. Since a theory had become a reality, no one could say for sure if the scaly propulsion was still a theory. The flying cars that were derived from the original veg fritter and some of the newer models all adopted the scaly propulsion concept. However, they weren't able to use it in the race like the original design did. When everyone realized the illogical aspects of the design, they had no choice but to make some modifications. The modified design was no longer called the scaly propulsion. Instead, it was given a different name based on the type and style of the car. Arrow's shuttle-shaped flying car, Vanguard's blade-shaped flying car, and Lightning's crescent-shaped flying car were all equipped with a secondary propulsion system based on the scale-shaped propulsion system. Arrow's shuttle-shaped flying car had auxiliary propulsion systems similar to the pelvic fins, pectoral fins, and caudal fins of a fish. Blade's and Crescent Moon flying cars also had auxiliary propulsion systems that matched their models. The auxiliary propulsion system would allow the flying car to go faster, but at the same time, it required the driver's driving skills to be higher. The slightest bit of carelessness could lead to unimaginable consequences, and in serious cases, the car would be destroyed and people would die. Of course, this was also the thrill of the competition. By now, Silen's group had caught up to the 3 flying cars in front of them. One of them had made a momentary lapse in acceleration, probably because it was too nervous and distracted by Silen's veg fritter, and crashed into the wall of a spiral curve. The flying car's safety measures were pretty good. At the very least, the 2 people in the car weren't in mortal danger. Logisticians would come over later to carry them out for treatment. This wasn't the first flying car to make a mistake since the start of the race. There were a few more flying cars before it, but most of them performed pretty well. Silen's veg fritter continued to pull further and further away from the other 2 flying cars in the passage. This passage was supposed to be the longest, and it had the most spirals and nodes. It was only natural that the racers would have to spend more time and energy to deal with it compared to the other tracks. But at this rate. While the technicians were analyzing veg fritter's situation, Naimi was even more surprised than they were. Naimi knew that veg fritter could fly very fast, but that was only if it was flying in a straight line without many obstacles. Right now, it was facing spiral curves and nodes. The flying car barely slowed down at all when it passed through the spirals and nodes. By now, Naimi was slowly recovering from his shock. He checked the official status of this track and the current overall ranking. There's a chance, there's definitely a chance. Silen was controlling the steering wheel with one hand and adjusting the control panel with the other. But to Naimi's surprise, he couldn't see Silen's movements at all, no matter which hand he used. Naimi's vision was a blur even if he focused all of his attention on it. Silen's driving ability was far better than they had imagined. How many more spirals and nodes are there? Silen asked, but his eyes never left the front window. Naimi took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He looked at the situation and said, excluding the one we just passed, there are 73 spirals left. 29 of them are continuous spirals with more than 3 rings. There are 17 nodes, 5 big nodes, 12 small nodes, and a 4-ring spiral in front of us. The parameters are. Naimi's legs were shaking a little even though he was explaining the situation in a clear and organized manner. His fingers hadn't warmed up yet, but he was no longer as terrified as he was before. It was replaced by indescribable excitement. This is what it means to be a racing car, a real racing car. Naimi didn't need to analyze too much. In fact, he felt that Silen could fly perfectly even if he didn't have a navigator. The 2 flying cars on the same track were completely left in the dust, and veg fritter was overtaking one car after another in the overall ranking. The audience was starting to realize that the antique flying car was starting to show its might. When there were 33 spirals left on the red track, veg fritter was at 41st place. When there were 19 spirals left on the red track, veg fritter was at 11th place. When there were 7 spirals left on the red track, veg fritter was only behind the top 3 seeds and was at 4th place. Right now, the spectators outside the track and elsewhere were going crazy. First, it was the red track, and it was known as the unluckiest track of this term. Second, it was an antique veg fritter that was said to have been abandoned by history a long time ago. Third, it was because no one had ever heard of this dark horse before. All the flying cars and racers who were invited to the Winds of Freedom had participated in a lot of relatively influential races in their respective star regions before they were invited to participate in the Winds of Freedom. Everyone more or less knew about such a character, but this racer was so unfamiliar that no one had ever heard of him before. This wasn't an illusion. Everyone had been paying attention to veg fritter since it caught up to them, far more than they had been paying attention to the top 3 seeds. It didn't look like a human could pass through the spirals and the nodes at that speed. At the very least, no one had ever seen such a thing happen in their lives. Is he cheating? Someone asked. How can anyone cheat like this? Can you show me? This is too fucking unbelievable. According to the original plan, Zhen Xingming's group was supposed to move to the next circuit midway through the race. However, Silen's veg fritter showed off its might one after another, so Zhen Xingming's group decided to stay where they were. This was the only place where they could watch veg fritter's surveillance footage and analysis. At first, no one was willing to leave, but as the race progressed, no one asked to leave anymore. Zhen Xingming stepped on the mountain of shelves at the edge of the stands and pointed at Vegfritter's footage with one hand on his waist and the other. He announced loudly, "See that? That's my bro." This sentence was obviously meant to show off, unlike the previous one which was mainly a warning. There were 3 spirals left on the red track, and it was impossible to say who would be the first one to make it out of the red track. There were more races left on the red track than the other 3, but no one could say for sure right now. Everyone sped up and fought to be the first to make a good start. Naimi's heart was pounding as he stared at the ranking and the race map on the screen. He didn't say anything to Silen, and Silen didn't ask how many races were left either. He simply charged out of the red track at high speed. He knew the rest of the race and the curves. Whoosh, there wasn't much of a difference in the time it took for the 4 flying cars to charge out of the passage at the same time. Arrow's flying car was the first to do so, Spearhead's flying car was the second, Silen's Vegfritter was the third, and Lightning's Crescent Moon was the fourth. These 4 flying cars stirred up the audience's emotions. The 5th car was still some distance away from the first 4 cars. At the very least, it wasn't shown on the same monitor at the entrance of the race. 25 points. Although it wasn't the first place's 40 points, Naimi was more than satisfied with the result. After all, they had chosen the unluckiest track of this year's race. In fact, Naimi wondered if Silen would have won first place if he had accelerated without considering his own adaptability at the beginning of the race. Naimi felt very ashamed when he thought of this. He was a burden to the team. "Get ready for the second circuit." Silen interrupted Naimi's thoughts and adjusted his car's condition swiftly. The next circuit was a rainforest zone. 2 walls of light were separated by 100 meters of distance, and there was a height restriction after the official second circuit. This meant that the race would be much more difficult than before. After rushing out of the passageway of the first stage, everyone knew their ranking and the ranking of the others. However, they didn't have much time to express their thoughts. Everyone was trying their best to rush to the second stage, and this was the time to close the gap with the others. However, when everyone gathered at the same track at the same time, they discovered an obvious problem. The Vegfritter charged forward like a bolt of lightning. It was so fast that everyone who saw it without the aid of a monitor couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over their bodies. Had that guy always raced at that speed? Arrow, Spearhead, and Lightning Seed sped up in unison after being imaged by Silen's Vegfritter. In the past, they were the only 3 pilots, so they wouldn't charge at full speed according to strategy. But now that an extreme guy was charging ahead of them, their pride wouldn't allow them to do so. As a result, the distance between the top 4 and the rest of the racers gradually widened. Some of the unlucky ones who had chosen a worse track were also chasing after them at full speed. Everyone's ranking was changing except for the top 4. Tobia and Chiu Su's pyramid flying car was in the 30s when they exited the track, but it was now 28. They hoped that they could push a little further into the second circuit. Silen was currently ranked first, but Naimi could see that Silen's expression hadn't changed since the start of the tournament. It was something that Naimi admired very much. He guessed that Silen was either a legendary expert or a robot. Otherwise, there was no way he could remain so calm. Didn't he say that he had never participated in a race of this level before? The second circuit started just like Silen's test drive. They flew a certain distance away from the forest. The 3 cars behind them prepared to activate their special sound waves and magnetic waves at the same time. These waves would affect the rattan trees and birds, so they only needed to deal with a few of them. But Silen was different. The waves Silen ordered Vegfritter to release were at the same frequency that everyone thought was useless. It was the same frequency that the isolation net emitted, and it would keep the animals away from the area and focus on the plants. Most of the time, plants caused more trouble than animals. That was why the people who received Vegfritter's waves didn't understand why Silen was doing this. But they understood the reason in the next moment. After Vegfritter released its frequency, the giant bird that was flying towards them turned around and flew towards the other flying cars. The rattan trees and some of the moving plants below them also started to move. It was at this moment a ring of jagged wrist blades popped out of the edge of Vegfritter. The jagged edges spun and cut through the vines that were hurled at them in an instant. At the same time, the surface of the flying car turned incredibly smooth after a flash of lightning. Some of the plants that managed to avoid the jagged edges slid off the flying car because their cilia weren't strong enough to hold onto the car. Only plants with leaves that looked like suction cups managed to wrap around the flying car, but the jagged edges of the flying car would be able to cut through the vines if it tilted the slightest bit. That was why Vegfritter was able to cut off the rattan trees wherever it flew, and the culprit was able to escape without a moment's delay. This was the plan they had discussed, but Naimi felt that something was wrong. It was different from what he had imagined. It was even faster than he had expected, and the pressure from the people around him was making him very uncomfortable. Sillin wasn't racing, it was more like he was venting. Naimi didn't understand why Sillin was acting like this, and he didn't dare ask. Right now, he thought that Sillin was terrifying. Although he was expressionless, serious, or smiling, he still felt unusually dangerous. Sitting less than half a meter away from Sillin in the navigator's seat, Naimi didn't dare to breathe too loudly. He didn't need to give any flying advice, because Sillin might be more familiar with the terrain and environment than he was. Or maybe Sillin didn't care at all, and he treated everything the same way no matter where he flew or who blocked his way. Vegfritter's jagged edges resonated with a lot of flying car enthusiasts. They didn't care if the design would affect the car's flying ability, but it was a scene that made many young racers' blood boil. Some people chose to dodge the rattan trees, and some chose to face them head-on. However, the latter would undoubtedly slow down the car, and it was a difficult choice to make. That being said, this gear-shaped design might be a good choice. It wouldn't slow them down too much, would it? Can't you see that I'm still flying as fast as I can? Vegfritter had to be very fast, but it wasn't flying in a straight line. Instead, it was flying in a curved line, and the car's tilt would change constantly to make sure that no tree branches would wrap around it. The car's surface was smooth, but it couldn't stop the suction cups and some of the more unusual plants from passing through. Every flying car was equipped with some machinery to deal with unexpected situations. There were also band saws and gears, but they were all small gears that popped out of the car and weren't as effective as Vegfritter's. Vegfritter was as slippery as a fish in a sea of trees. It slipped out of the tentacles of a predator, and bit if it couldn't. The second circuit wasn't just a test of the racer's driving skills, it was also a test of a flying car's ability to deal with similar situations. This was a circuit that allowed the use of weapons. There were all kinds of weapons, and the spectators would vote for their favorite weapon after the race was over. This was a rare data-gathering method for the Sizer family. The second circuit was the shortest out of all 7 circuits. After passing through the sea of trees, Sillin and the others were the first to exit the circuit. Spearhead's flying blade was second, Lightning's crescent moon flying car was third, and Arrow's flying shuttle flying car was fourth. Just like before, the 4 flying cars weren't too far away from each other, especially the 3 flying cars behind them. Vegfritter and the other 3 flying cars were just a little bit bigger in comparison to the rest of the group. This was the advantage and disadvantage of different car models. Different car models would have their own advantages and disadvantages in different circuits. 40 points. We have 60 points now. Naimi was very happy, but he didn't get carried away just yet. After all, only 2/7 of the circuit had passed. It didn't take long for them to enter a dark world after passing through the sea of green trees. A pillar of mud shot high into the air, signaling the start of the 3rd circuit. This was the dirtiest circuit of the race. After all the flying cars had flown out of the forest, 2 people appeared at a corner of the forest and said something to each other before vanishing into thin air. The only sound left behind was the rustling of footsteps. Chapter 267. In front of them was a dark swamp. They couldn't see how deep or shallow the swamp was. Some places were bubbling with mud, and when they got closer, they could even hear the bubbling sounds of mud bubbling. The tall mud pillars were only sprayed out from the deeper parts of the swamp. The mud was very dense and viscous, so it would be very troublesome for the flying vehicle to be sprayed with it. If the mud couldn't be brushed off in time, the vehicle's speed would be affected, and its balance would be destroyed. Scylla drove the car through the mud pillars. Tilting the car to a certain angle would give it more space to dodge the mud pillars. The 3 cars behind them were in hot pursuit, and the other cars were gradually catching up to them. Perhaps their disadvantage was over, and the people behind them would catch up to them. Every stage was a new ranking process. There were a lot of racers who hadn't gotten a single point yet, but they weren't anxious. They were obviously veterans, and they knew which stages were their strengths and which were their weaknesses. As long as the flying vehicle wasn't destroyed, there would always be a chance for them to make it to the top. We have 65 points right now. The third place of the Rainbow of Beginnings has 25 points, and the first place of the second circuit has 40 points, so there's no need to rush. We just need to play it safe, Naimi said. Scylla replied with a "Mn" to indicate that he understood. Naimi used the car's omnidirectional cameras to search for hidden dangers, places that would make it easy for the car to accelerate, and points that needed attention to be paid to Scylla. There was no need for him to explain anything else. Scylla could do it all by himself. When one of the mud pillars collided with the other pillar that was shooting out diagonally, the mud inside the 2 pillars erupted in 2 different directions and covered the entire area. No matter what happened, Scylla's flying car would be splashed with mud no matter what. The brownish-black mud slammed against the flying car, leaving clear traces of high-speed splashes. A white light flashed, and the splashed mud on the surface of the flying car instantly froze at an ultra-low temperature. Then, the surface of the flying car was shattered by the supersonic shattering effect of the flying car's surface, turning it into powder and flying away from the car. This was a common method used by flying cars, and some of the cars behind them used a similar method. However, it wouldn't be so easy for some unlucky racer to crash directly into the mud pillar. If they didn't react in time, they would be stuck to the mud pillar, and the enormous pressure and stickiness would drag them straight into the swamp. Naimi felt that Scylla was a lot calmer than he was in the rainforest. Maybe it was because he hadn't calmed down from the start of the race. Arrow was first, Scylla's Vegfritter was second, and Spearhead was fourth. Naimi finally let out a sigh of relief after he charged out of the circuit. Second place wasn't too bad. He was expecting third or fourth place, and this was more than enough. There would be a repair shop set up at the end of every circuit, and every racing team had their own repair shop there. However, the first 2 circuits were only the beginning, so most of the flying cars hadn't stopped for maintenance yet. Now that the 3rd circuit was over, some flying cars finally started flying over for quick maintenance. After all, there was no room for error in the next circuit. A flying car had to have a self-detection index of 9.5 or above, not even 9.0. The first 4 flying cars didn't stop. They all sped up and charged forward. The dark swamp and the miasma at the bottom slowly disappeared as well. The 4 cars made a big turn and flew in a different direction. There was a hint of white on the horizon, and the temperature display on the flying car told him that it was getting colder the further they flew. It was because that was the planet's polar region. He stuffed an energy supplement into his mouth, chewed on it, and gulped down the water. Naimi passed him. Scylla looked into the distance and estimated that it would be night by the time they reached the polar region. The drivers and navigators took advantage of this time to replenish their energy. The navigators explained the general situation of Saida to the drivers and confirmed some countermeasures. The navigators also had another role, and that was to calm the drivers' emotions. They had to keep them in a stable state no matter how good or bad their results were in the previous circuit. Just as Scylla predicted, night had fallen by the time they reached the 4th circuit, the snowy glacier. The starry sky looked great, but the wind on the ground was the most disharmonious. The wind blew the snow that had fallen on the glacier all over the place. It wasn't snowing, but it looked even worse than snow. It was a snowstorm that didn't come from the sky. There were also some tiny pieces of ice mixed in with the wind, and it was very easy for a high-speed flying car to experience the same situation as Tobia and the others last time. Because the surface of the car wasn't protected properly after repeated collisions, the parts would loosen and cause a series of reactions. Tobia and the others were still fine. Because of this, many flying cars would undergo maintenance and reinforcement checks before this circuit to ensure that there would be no undesirable situations in the snowy glaciers. Flying cars couldn't fly too high. There might not be a snowstorm at high altitudes, but there was a much lower temperature than a snowstorm. The air pressure there was different from the air pressure near the ground. Someone had once experimented at that altitude, and a robot had flown a flying car up there. It didn't take long for the entire car to freeze, its energy system crippled, and its thrusters destroyed. This was a special phenomenon at the planet's polar region, so the flying cars wouldn't fly too high during this circuit. Of course, flying at low altitudes wasn't easy either. Because of the glacier, the airflow didn't have a fixed direction, and the wind that was deflected by the glacier could send a flying car flying. Therefore, the safest way was to drive on the ground. Every flying car in the race was a tricycle. No matter how good they were at flying in the air, they could still drive on the ground. The flying cars sprung out of their spiked wheels and sped across the snowy ground. Compared to their flying speed in the previous circuits, they were moving at a snail's pace. Among these flying cars, there was one exception, and that was Vegfritter. The other flying cars sprung out of their wheels to drive on the ground, but Vegfritter had sharp teeth growing out of its sides when it flipped over. Unlike the wrist blades of the rainforest, these sharp teeth allowed it to drive better on the icy ground. It was round in shape, so it looked like a big wheel. The edges turned, but the center didn't. The Sillin didn't want to follow this wheel. At the same time, Vegfritter's sharp teeth weren't the only things around it. There were also a lot of small wheels that balanced the airflow. These wheels weakened the airflow and provided Vegfritter with some mechanical energy to drive through the snow. The icy ground wasn't completely smooth, or they would have been sliding on it already. There were many cone-shaped protrusions on the icy ground, and they would run into them if they were to slide. As the flying cars sped across the icy ground, on the other side of the glacier, on a glacier not far from the cursor's track, 5 blurry figures were outlined by the strong wind and snow. However, when these people shook off the ice and snow, they could not see any of them. All that was left were the shadows left by the strong wind and snow. They were invisible. 30 minutes left. An emotionless voice rang in the air. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of crushed ice could be heard. However, it was hard to hear in such an environment where the wind was howling. A while later. 20 minutes left. The voice suddenly paused. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The special bullets flew through the wind and flew towards the 5 people. Bang! The bullets were stopped by a protective barrier about 10 centimeters away from the 5 people and shattered. 6 people appeared 100 meters away from the 5 people. Sula was one of them. The Gen family. The 5 people on the other side also revealed themselves. Unlike Sula and the others, their equipment wasn't layered with layers of protection. They didn't wear thermal clothing, bulletproof vests, or breathing masks. They only wore a thin layer of clothing and pants, but they didn't feel cold at all. Sillin felt like he was being watched from many sides since the start of the race. Sula and the others were definitely one of them, but who was the other? Sillin thought that he was just a minor character in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Even if he knew the sea blue gold formula and was connected to the Gen family, he couldn't be as important as a true noble family descendant like Gen Xingming and the others, could he? Moreover, Gen Xingming and the others were in a group of 4. If someone really wanted to cause trouble for the royal family, they would be the perfect targets. However, Sillin was the one who was in trouble right now. Before this, Silen had only wanted to use the flying car race to vent his emotions. After all, there were a lot of things that had been bottled up in his heart for a long time. Sometimes, he would think of the people in Vanguard Division 6, and sometimes he would think of that idiot Long, Night, and C.I. Jinchang when he saw Zhen Xingming and the other rich kids. It was a conditioned reflex from his memories. Sometimes, Silen would wonder, if he really couldn't go back, would he forget those people after a long time? Would he return to his life on planet Brown Earth? There was the wilderness here, and there were new people here. However, there was no sense of belonging. Genya said that he would get used to it, but every time Silen heard Huimao talking in his sleep, he would think that no one could deny a person's memories, not even a cyborg like him. Genya had returned home, so where was his home? Was it this galaxy that still seemed unfamiliar to him? While he was thinking, Silen suddenly narrowed his eyes and looked in a certain direction. What's wrong? Naimi noticed that something was wrong with Silen just now and was about to warn him, but he was caught off guard by Silen's sudden movement. Silen didn't say anything, but he frowned and looked to the front. No one knew what he was thinking. On the other side of the glacier, Sula and the others were in a bad situation. They thought that they would be able to handle the situation with these people, but things were much more troublesome than they imagined. Communication was cut off, and they couldn't call for backup. 4 of the 6 people they brought were injured, and 2 of them were seriously injured. What do we do? Her companion asked Sula when she saw the charging robot. Sula didn't turn around. Her broken saber was stuck in the ice, so she couldn't pull it out just yet. She quickly calmed her breathing and prepared to fight the robot with her lightsaber. At this moment, a white light flashed, and the robot that was rushing over was sliced in half. Sula looked at the person who had suddenly appeared at the robot's position and let out a sigh of relief. The person had white hair, white eyebrows, and black and white circles around his pupils. He looked like a snowy field at night. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.